Today is Friday, June 24th, 2016, and I am here at the offices of Mike McManus in Ventura, California, speaking with him about his 20-year illustrious career in the United States Air Force. My name is Elizabeth Lee, and I will be interviewing Mike on behalf of the Conejo Valley National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution for the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress. Ed Lynch from Advanta Videography will be filming and editing the interview. Mike was born on April 12, 1969 in Billings, Montana. He served in the U.S. Air Force from June 1987 to June 2007. During his time in the service, he was honored with dozens of service medals, among them the Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Force Commendation Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with Valor Device, the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, the Global War on Terror Expeditionary Medal, the Korean Defense Medal, and the NATO Medal, to name a few. Mike achieved the rank of Senior Master Sergeant, considered by many to be the most difficult enlisted promotion in the Air Force. Although retired from active duty, Mike continues his very personal involvement with the military as a veteran service officer for the County of Ventura and as chairman of the board for the Ventura County Military Collaborative, an organization consisting of over 180 agencies serving Ventura County military, veterans, and their families. This is Mike McManus' story. Okay, let's start out talking a little bit about where you grew up.
I was born in Billings, Montana, April 12, 1969. My parents at the time lived in Laurel, which is like 15 miles from Billings. We eventually moved to Miles City, Montana, which is southeastern Montana, and that's where I grew up myself, and of course my mom and dad, and I've got two younger brothers. And so all of my family is still back in Montana in different parts. Billings, Colstrip, and I've got aunts and uncles all over the place. So yeah, Montana is definitely still my spiritual home, if you will, even though I'm living out here now in beautiful Ventura.
How big is Billings? Is it?
Billings is probably about the same size as Ventura, around 100 and 110,000 people. Yeah.
So how did a kid from Billings end up 20 years in the Air Force?
Growing up, always, watching, hey, John Wayne, Green Berets, hoorah, kind of a thing. I had one grandfather who was in the Army during the World War II era. My dad was drafted for Vietnam. Actually, he and my mom, he didn't end up going to Vietnam. They were in Germany for a number of years. So anyway, just kind of growing up and seeing pictures of, family members in uniform and just always thinking, all right, I'm either going to be a policeman or, in the military. Going back years, my mom was showing me some things, when you're like 7 years old, hey, what do you want to be? And I wrote on there, soldier, and, that kind of thing. So, and that was initially the direction I was going, was field artillery, young, let's blow some things up type of a thing. And, but I was 17. Army recruiters in the living room with my mom, and my dad comes home and talking.
At what age?
I was 17.
So the Army recruiter?
Yeah, Army recruiter, and I was ready to, field artillery and everything else, but, my dad came home, was talking to him. Of course, he had served, and his brother had also served Army Airborne. So he said, that's great, but as long as you still require my signature, I'm going to make him think about it, a couple more months. Basically what happened, the Army recruiter said, absolutely, respect that. I'll talk to him when he's 18. And about a month and a half after that, I turned 18. I was waiting to hear from St. Mary's. It's a small college in North Dakota. Hear from them and the Army recruiter. Air Force recruiter beat them both to the punch. So I went down and talked to him and said, hey, that sounds good to me. So let's rock and roll. And, then 20 years after that.
Were you mad at your dad when he wouldn't sign?
Oh, no. No, it was, especially now in retrospect, it's probably a good idea, that kind of thing. At the time, I was a little disappointed because I was, gung-ho, let's get this thing going and that kind of thing. So didn't necessarily have a plan. I figured college was involved in that kind of thing, but I figured my parents raised me for 18 years. I wasn't going to make them pay for college as well until I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So no, when the Air Force recruiter called, if the Army had called, I'd have spent however many years in the Army. So Air Force beat him to the punch.
Now, why did the Army come to your home?
Well, because I'd already gone down and talked to them,
Okay.
and of course, they're going to schools and different things like that as well. So we'd already, been talking, and right there, that was literally to ink the contract, so to speak. But because I was only 17, it required my parents' signature, so that's why he came to the home.
Did your grandfather talk about World War II?
Not so much. I mean, a little bit. He came in later. He was German, and he didn't actually end up deploying to Europe or that kind of thing. He was actually, they sent him out here to California to train like vehicle mechanics and vehicle operators and that kind of thing. So he spent most of his World War II, the last couple of years of World War II, in the desert of California, kind of a thing. So he would certainly talk about some of the some of the shenanigans and just the heat of the desert, and doing basically his contribution to the war effort, even though might have had some family members back in Germany on the other side.
So when you were 17, you wanted to join so you could kind of blow things up and all that?
Well, I wanted to, it was just something I'd always wanted to do, be part of something bigger than yourself type of a thing. I figured certainly the military, in that case the Army, was a way for me to do that. I was always a reader, loved history and things like that, and it was like, well, reading about history is great, but I want to go see if I can be a part of making a little bit of it myself, my little contribution anyway. So that's just kind of why it was always appealing. And
do you feel like you did that?
yeah, I definitely was part of a team, making contributions on a pretty big scale. So yeah, it was an honor to serve for 20 years. Met some absolutely great people, and we'll talk a little bit about later on in some of the places I was at and the operations or campaigns I was involved in. So yeah, a lot of really good people doing some very amazing work in some either nice locations or some not so nice locations.
So when you were 17 or 18, there were events going on in the Persian Gulf. Were you aware of?
Well, that was 1987.
Yeah.
So we, Saddam hadn't quite, he was obviously the Iran-Iraq war was going on and that kind of thing. But, there really wasn't any, hot war, I guess, if you would. Not like certainly our young folks that are joining now after 9/11, knowing fully good and well where they're going to end up, either Iraq or Afghanistan. That really wasn't the case when I, enlisted in 1987. Cold War, certainly, of course, who know, what's going to happen. But there were no hot wars, so to speak, in 87.
So did you think about any of that stuff, talk about
Oh,
any
sure.
of that stuff in the home?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent. And, of course, my mom, once I decided I was going to enlist, and she worried for the next, 20 years until I actually retired and handed her some roses and that kind of thing, and then she could relax.
Oh. So your mom wasn't a fan?
Oh, well, I mean, she was, supportive, and this is what I wanted to do, so she was going to be supportive in that. Probably was definitely not her first choice. I'm sure going to college first and foremost was probably what she would have preferred. No, it worked out well, and she was certainly proud and supportive, as my whole family was. But yeah, I'm sure that was definitely not her first choice. Probably going to college at St. Mary's and that kind of thing, that was probably a little more, to her liking.
But you don't regret that?
Oh, not at all. I mean, you wonder a little bit what would have happened if you'd taken a different road and stuff like that. But the service was very good to me. Like I said, I met a lot of really good people, did some good things, was part of doing some good things. So no regrets.
Was the recruiter where you went to enlist, was that in Billings? Did you go in?
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, it was in Miles City.
Okay. Did your dad go with you?
Not initially. No.
Not at 18.
Just said. No, not when I was 18. I mean, that's basically, when the Air Force recruiter did call, and I said, yeah, sure. He was actually at one of the hotels, he'd set up because he was traveling and that kind of thing. So yeah, I had several individuals meet him down there and give us a little recruiter spiel where they don't out and out lie, but if you don't know the questions to ask,
say?
well, I mean, obviously, hey, we're gonna, a little bit about the history and being part of something bigger than yourself, and what do you college? Hey, that's great. Travel the world, you bet.
Which was true.
Oh, absolutely. Steady paycheck. All of those kinds of things. Learn a skill, see the world. Get paid for it. But yeah, they certainly don't go into. And keep in mind, it was a different time too in '87. So. There was really no, hot wars, if you will. So he didn't really touch on, hey, it's a Cold War, could go hot at any time. No, that's certainly not, talked about. Or that, hey, you could end up being, stationed someplace that a little less desirable than you want. They don't go into a lot of those things. And if you don't ask the questions, they don't give you the answers. But no,
Do you wish they had told you stuff like that, or do
Oh,
you think
no.
it would have discouraged
No,
you?
I don't think it would matter to. Wouldn't have mattered to me then. I don't think it'd matter to a lot of young men and women joining today. I mean, they've all got their own reasons, and the recruiters aren't there to dissuade them. But even if they were, it wouldn't have made any difference for me, and I doubt very much it'd make a difference for a lot of individuals.
So when did you take off for basic training?
Yeah, so I graduated from high school in May of 1987, and 2 weeks later I was on a plane. First time I was ever on, a large commercial aircraft, headed from Billings, Montana to San Antonio, Texas. This was June '87 time frame. So, hey, Montana boy, headed to the military, basic training, first time on a plane of any size. San Antonio is probably 11:30 at night, hot, muggy, of course dark. You're like, okay, this.
Billings is not hot and muggy.
Billings can certainly get very hot, but it's dry. You add humidity to it, that's a whole different animal. So yeah, get down there too, and of course you get, off the plane, grab your stuff, get on a bus. Of course they're yelling at you and stuff like that. And then you get out to Lackland Air Force Base, which is in San Antonio. All Air Force basic trainees go through Lackland Air Force Base. And so the next Air Force basic has changed a lot over the years, but for me at that time it was only 6 weeks long. And so long as you could handle, you get training on a variety of different things, from Air Force history to, first aid and things like that. But marching and drill and ceremony and all that type of thing. But so long as you could, make it through some, physical conditioning and things like that, and you didn't mind people screaming, I always figured, well, don't do anything that they're going to scream at you for. So that's usually a good thing. Some people just can't get out of their own way. Therefore, the drill instructors were on them quite a bit.
You have some fond memories.
Yeah,
of
yeah.
drill
Well,
instructors and some pictures.
Yeah, well, I'll show you one of them. This was just actually I kept this all these years, but that was the initial enlistment documents and that kind of thing. I'll just kind of put them down here.
Okay.
But yeah,
one
thing I did want to point out, my drill instructor, and I think most individuals when they join the service, they most certainly have, I don't know if it's a fond memory, but a memory of their primary drill instructor. Mine was Sergeant Nichols, and no matter what happened, his only saying was "whoop-de-fucking-do." That was it. You could have came in, bleeding, or it did not matter what it was. That was going to be his saying. But we had some issues.
He was saying that right there.
Oh, probably a few other things, advising him how his mother is, and of course his long hair, and that sort of thing. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, so I'm sure, he was there to do a job. All the drill instructors did it. But we had a couple individuals that were, they had a hard time getting up at Reveille, which was usually at 5:00. So Sergeant Nichols would come in at 04:30 and turn on, it was a hideous rock band called Suicidal Tendencies.
Death of the Riviera, private network, private top of all there, got it on.
4:30 in the morning. You shouldn't hear that music probably at any time during the day, but at 4:30 in the morning. So yeah, needless to say, people got used to getting up at 4:30. So when Reveille went off, hey, that was not a problem. But yeah, he was definitely one of those throw the trash can down the bay, or if you did something that particularly upset him, he dented a few trash cans.
Upset him?
Anything, whether it made sense or not, it didn't matter. If you came to him with an issue and you interrupted him, it's just part of the whole shtick, basically. There are definitely some individuals who just couldn't get it. They couldn't get the drill. They just couldn't, we have to do some crazy things like, iron your underwear and T-shirts, and they'd have to be little, 6-inch squares or whatever, and everything completely square. And, people not in the service, well, that's kind of silly. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
That's a very basic thing. If you can't do something as simple as, fold and iron your T-shirt to a 6-inch square, why on earth are we going to trust you with multi-million-dollar aircraft or someone else's well-being and things like that? So
that's the purpose?
Oh, absolutely. It's basically we're getting rid of the civilian mentality, and we're going to basically break you down and build you up. And part of that is...
Or people who won't follow direction.
It's certainly used to weed out those who can't follow directions. Well, not
Or
can't,
won't.
but won't. Because maybe you have some issues, but we're going to get you there and that kind of thing. And that's what the drill instructors were there for all of those. We're going to get you to what we want an airman to be, whether it's physical conditioning or just self-aid or first aid or any of the other things we want you to know. But just those basic listening skills, and then you can complete a very basic task. Because if you can't do that, maybe the military is not quite the place for you.
Is that what they want an airman
Oh yeah,
to be?
it all served a purpose. At the time, you're like, really, you want me to do what? You just do it. Just do it, and you've got no issues. For those few that would kind of fight those kinds of things, you knew exactly what was going to happen. I mean, they could be, if you got so many demerits, your uniform wasn't crisp and clean and stuff like that, or if you were asked to recite a particular, chain of command or whatever, and you couldn't do that, and here's a demerit. You get so many demerits, you could actually get recycled. In other words, you're in your flight, which I've got
let's take a look.
a picture here. I was looking at the other day going, wow, a little scary. But, so here's my basic training flight, and this is me right here.
Okay.
And, of course, Sergeant Nichols there. But, yeah, if you couldn't get, some things right, you could be recycled from your flight back to an early or
another.
Yes, and
So
if
you
you were
keep
week
going
4
through.
or 5 in, you could end up back in week 1, and why on earth would you ever want to do that? So just do what you need to do, get out of there, and then press on. But yeah, for a few folks, they couldn't. You could either be recycled back, or if that happened a couple of times, maybe it's just time we send you on your merry way.
Were any of these people in this group recycled,
Oh, I'm not. We did pretty
You
well.
don't have to point them out.
No, well, and this
We
is
can zero in
this
on
is
it.
actually there's this guy. No, actually, July 30th of '87 is our graduation, so this is all that made it.
Okay.
So yeah,
How many were there?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how many were in our particular flight, but we definitely, I'd say it was probably 5 or 6 that
Washed out.
washed out. Yeah. So which.
In your opinion, is this an approach that still works?
Oh sure.
I mean,
oh,
because it's
absolutely.
been going on since
Yeah.
this
I
whole
mean,
thing
figures
started,
as long as
right?
the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy have been around, of course the Air Force, the newest branch, but it's been going on. I mean, they've Air Force basic training now is something like 8.5 weeks. Encompasses a lot more field training because we realized really from the wars 9/11 on that the mission of the Air Force had changed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with some of the
that'd be
units.
interesting
But
to know.
they needed to know a lot more basic, whether it was weapons training, just field, exercise training and things like that. A lot more first aid, how to respond to alarm conditions, attacks, and things like that. So it was extended and that kind of thing. I believe now they even call them recruit. They're not even called airmen until you graduate, that type of thing. So improvements, as far as I'm concerned, needed to be made because really the mission changed. Therefore, where it all starts, which is that basic training, needed to change as well. So yeah, it's a method that works. So why not? I mean, if someone crumples because someone's yelling at them, they're probably going to crumple when they're actually in some pretty dire situations. So
You had some shots of you being inoculated there too, as well.
Oh well, that's actually in that book there.
Okay.
I mean, you kind of run through. It's kind of like a
Yeah, this is one of the shots where you were not happy.
running the cattle through. Basically here. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah.
Was that a moment in which you thought, what am I doing, or just?
Well, yeah, you do kind of you do kind of wonder, but no, I mean it's just one of those things.
You never questioned.
No, I mean, hey, you got to get shot, so
You never questioned what you did in basic.
No. I mean, there's nothing that I mean, it might have been physically or maybe challenging in some way, but it certainly wasn't going to result in you being injured because it was something you should have been doing. You figure I'm the military. If they ask me to run, guess what? You run. they're going to send you all over
It's a
the
good
world.
attitude.
So this here, I'm not in this shot here, but basically, yeah, it's just a color shot, so it might show up a little bit better. But it's just getting the different inoculations for all kinds of things, because obviously, well,
They don't know where they're going to send
yeah,
you at the
pretty
time.
much,
So they
absolutely.
just do everything.
Yeah, you're just walking through, and it's an air gun, so that injects it in. And there's I think there was like 2 or 3 different stations, so different ones. And they give you the warning, don't move, because if you flinch a little bit, that high pressure, it'll cut you. So yeah, you got guys walking out and their arms are bleeding and stuff because they flinched a little bit. But yeah,
At which point they encounter Sergeant O'Neill.
well, they're
and
very,
he
very,
repeats his
yes,
mantra.
yes, exactly. They could have walked up to him, I'm bleeding here, and yes, the whoop-de-fucking-do would have come out, and he would have said, go clean up, and that would have been it. So yeah.
What were the living conditions like?
Oh, I mean, well, for me, I mean, I was, good family, raised, didn't want for anything. Or if we did, we had no idea that was the case. So, I mean, you're in a barrack, you got a cot. Hey, usually at the end of the day, you're pretty tired, so it doesn't really matter. You sleep on a piece of plywood, but yeah, so you sleep there on your bunk, no issues there. You don't have to worry about clothes. You don't have to worry about, some place to sleep. The food was good. I mean, what the heck? You don't really have all that much time to eat it. Literally, when 4 individuals at a table, you'd sit down with your trays. You've got, 30. Maybe a couple minutes to eat whatever it is you took. And if you took it, you better eat it. And then, of course, you'd walk by what we call the snake pit, and that's where all the drill instructors would sit, having their breakfast or their dinner, whatever it is. And if you were walking by, they could say, they could ask you any question, and you'd have to stop, report, and you better be able to answer the question, or there's a demerit, or you're doing push-ups or some crazy thing. But, yeah, living conditions were fine. I mean, you got to do a lot of run. You got your classroom time. You got people that you can either endure or you really get along with, or, you know what, you're an idiot, but yeah, I'm not going to change that, and I'm not going to let you get me in trouble, so you just kind of ignore them. For a couple individuals, that was pretty much the entire flight. And, those are usually the people, for whatever reason, end up getting recycled or maybe even just, kicked out of the service altogether. So, living conditions were fine.
You mentioned earlier, though, that was something that you wish, or that they glossed over when they were recruiting, about some living conditions were not that great.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if you ever
No,
had
I
living
mean,
conditions that weren't
really
that
for
great.
us, I mean, the biggest thing is, you are in San Antonio, Texas, and it's June, July, time frame. So you got a lot of heat and you got a lot of humidity and you've got thunderstorms. If we could actually, when it was time, we're out PTing and things like that, physical training, and we're running, but say a thunderstorm were to come in, if it's within a certain distance, you can't be out running around. They don't want people getting struck by lightning. So we would be underneath. The barracks were shaped that there was cover. And then you go up into the barracks. Well, unfortunately, if you couldn't PT outside because of thunderstorms, you would literally run in place for 15, 20 minutes or whatever the case is. San Antonio, Texas, in June or July, you don't want to run in place. If you could run a formation, you could be done because you could kick it out. But if you're running in place, they was just simply you're being timed and that was it. So that I did not like. So that's probably the closest thing is just the sheer heat and humidity and like, oh great, I'm gonna have to run in place, as opposed to let's just get out there, let's just run, do the course, whatever it is, and you can get it done.
Where's the worst place you were in your service, if there was one?
Worst place. Korea at times was not all that enjoyable. Where I was at, Kunsan Air Base, Republic of Korea, because it's on the west coast and the Yellow Sea, and it's kind of aptly named. And when we get to Kunsan, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I mean, so some of the living conditions there weren't all that good, but still, in comparison to a lot of people, certainly can't complain. Obviously, Kuwait, especially when we were building up, and then of course when the war started and things like that. There were some, plenty of things that weren't enjoyable, but you just do it because guess what? Everybody else is doing it too, especially in, depending upon what your position. I was a first sergeant, so yeah, you press on. And
You
even
had
if,
to set an example.
oh,
at that
absolutely. Even
point.
if things are, not all that good, or you disagree with this, or whatever the condition might be, it doesn't matter. There's a mission to do, and
You're
you
responsible for
whining
everybody.
about it. Absolutely, yeah, that's not conducive to the whole unit cohesion and doing what needs to be done. So, but yeah, I mean, Korea at times a little rough, and
Least favorite, Korea.
well, oh no, my least favorite. At a certain time when I came from Korea to Hill Air Force Base, Utah, the unit I was with initially there, the fuels management flight there, was a mixture of GIs, airmen, and civil service, and the mixture does not go well. Many of the GS, the civil service employees were good. Some most certainly were not, and you can't really do a whole hell of a lot about it. And they can be really disruptive to a young airman coming in. Maybe that's their first base, and I would simply tell them, I says, hey, there's two U's here. The UCMJ, and that governs us. Don't ever confuse that with the union, which covers the GS, the civil service folks. So that particular time with the supply squadron and the fuels management flight was probably my least enjoyable. I did deploy out of there to Germany for Allied Force, and I'll talk about that in just a bit.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the best times. But yeah, just the kind of the personnel makeup and stuff like that in that particular unit. Yeah, that was probably the least enjoyable of all my service time. But after I basic training, went to Chanute Air Force Base, which is near Rantoul, Illinois. And it was probably August, September, October. So September, October in Illinois is certainly a pretty chilly time. But I've got a picture.
And what were you doing there?
Well, that's for me anyway. Let me see, where am I at? Oh yeah, I was sporting the flat top there. My wife now gets a kick out of that. But,
yeah, let's see that. Hair's pretty long.
Well, I don't know. Shaved on top. Yeah, no more than an inch
At
least
least you
and a
don't have
quarter.
the man bun going. Which
No,
is correct at this time.
no man buns. Still wouldn't do one a day even if I could. But yeah, basically, you go from basic training and you graduate that in your what we call particular skill level. Then you go to your A school. It's like your initial training for what your Air Force job, your
What you're
AFSC,
gonna
Air
do
Force
next.
Specialty Code is going to be. And that is where you learn the very basics. And for me, it was fuels management. So
Did you request that?
yeah, really not knowing. Hey, okay, sounds kind of cool. Work around fuels. You got everything, mobility systems, because most of the world doesn't have the infrastructure we need, and with the mobility systems, we can go anywhere, set up, and that type of thing. But yeah, it just kind of interested me as opposed to others because they don't have openings in everything. So that was one that they had an opening, and of course I was all fired up. Let's go. So yeah, it was what we call a guaranteed job. But yeah, so I was there for the next, I don't know, I think it was something like 8 weeks or thereabouts.
And what kind of things did they teach you?
Basically here it's you're learning different types of storage systems. So you're talking pumps and filters and different things like that. Vehicles, we've got everything from a 1,200 gallon to a 5 and a 6,000 gallon truck. So it's just the operation of the vehicle as well as the actual use of the dispensing and things like that. You also learn a little bit about, because within fuels management, you're doing the accounting for it. You do the receipt. Maybe it's coming in from a pipeline, a railroad tank car, a tank truck, that kind of thing. So there's contracting pieces of it. There's the storage. Lab, you have to do a lot of analysis on it and things like that because it has to be mil spec. Because obviously, if you got say an F-16 flying around 600 miles an hour, that fuel you can't have any issues with the fuel. And then you also have what we call.
And you have to have enough.
You have to have enough. Absolutely, yeah. Running out is not an option. So you've got your dispersal systems, your storage systems. How do you account for it? What's kind of quality control and things like that. So those are some of the basic things that you learn at our A school for fuels management, which was at the time was at Chanute, which now is closed. But yeah, it was near Rantoul, Illinois, and it was good. It was a good experience. In fact, one of my dad's employers. Was during World War II. He had various missions, but at one point in time he was brought back to the States and he actually trained other bomber crews out of Chanute Air Force Base. And now, of course, that's the 1940s, mid 40s, and I was there, 1987, time frame. But a lot of the same buildings, same runway, and things like that. So it was kind of interesting, a little bit of history and that kind of thing. But after A school, then I went to my first real base, if you will, which was Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. It's in Rapid City, South Dakota. Black Hills, South Dakota, absolutely beautiful. The base itself, loved it. It's about 8 miles out of town, kind of up on a plateau. So if anyone who's ever spent any time in a South Dakota winter knows it can get very windy and very cold. In fact, it was either the first or second year there. We were in these barracks that are actually left over from World War II, and they were eventually torn down. But at the time, we were in these World War II era barracks, two-story. And we had so much snow, and the wind drifted everything up. It literally covered people's cars. It covered the first level of the barracks. So we would literally just punch out a screen, and people would slide down out of the second story. No power, no water, none of that kind of stuff. It was that way for probably a good week. I mean, but you still have to keep the runway clear in case any aircraft.
How does that affect your responsibilities? Because you can't go down.
Well, what happens is if you're the one, you're on base, obviously. So you walk to work, and because you figure all the generators around base still need fuel. Security forces still need to go around, so you got to make sure the filling station or if they're out mobile, that you can get out to them and fill them up that way. The snow plows obviously are clearing massive amounts of snow, so you got to help keep them going. And the aircraft were all grounded because they're covered in snow. But in case there's any kind of emergencies, you got to have a clear runway. That's always the priority. But this is also 1987, 88, 89 time frame. So we had, and that was the days of SAC, Strategic Air Command. So we had B-1B bombers there. We had B-52 bombers. We had tankers, KC-135 tankers, and then another aircraft called an EC-135, and that was a looking glass.
I've got a looking glass.
I do not, but I think you've got.
One. That's a looking glass.
Well, that's all right. That's an EC-135, at least a tail section. This one's out of Offutt. Well, that's all right. It's out of Offutt Air Force Base, which was headquarters for SAC at the time.
Okay.
So basically, what these aircraft would do, you had. If I can, I'll show them.
Want that one?
Yeah, this one here. This is the other type of aircraft we had there, which was the KC-135.
Refueling a.
Now that looks like an F-15.
I thought it was an F-16, darn it.
Yeah,
because you had F-16s,
yeah,
right?
we had well, not at Ellsworth. Ellsworth was strictly a bomber base and a tanker base, and at one time a missile base. But the missile complex had closed just before I got there. ICBMs. But in the we had to keep back to kind of that winter storm and stuff, and because it was during the Cold War, and Ellsworth was one of those SAC bases, like Offutt and Minot, North Dakota, and that type of thing.
And what does the SAC base mean what's the significance of that?
SAC was really born out of World War II, but Strategic Air Command. And as things developed, it had two legs of the U.S. nuclear triad. You had bomber-based nuclear missiles. You had large missile complexes with the missile silos in the ground, the ICBMs and that kind of thing. And then the Navy had boomers or nuclear, where they could launch nuclear missiles from submarines. So SAC controlled, two legs of that triad, the air and then the ground-based, with the Navy having obviously the sea-based. So we would have B-1s on alert that had nuclear weapons on them. We would have, these KC-135s that were fully fueled, and a KC-135 can take hundreds of thousands of pounds of fuel because our whole idea is to refuel other aircraft. So
yeah, because I read the B-52 has 70,000 pounds of weapons.
Oh, easily of weapons, absolutely. And you add to that probably another 250,000 pounds of fuel. Yes, absolutely. Amazing aircraft, both B-52 and the B-1.
So how much in the Stratotanker?
Oh,
that's the Stratotanker, the top.
350,000 pounds easily, because you figure it's offloading. The military doesn't get anywhere quick without air refueling. Nothing against any other services, but if you got to get somewhere, you're flying there, and if you're flying there, it's what we call the air bridge. Every so often they have to meet up with a tanker to receive more fuel. So, again, Cold War, so you got bombers on nuclear alert. You've got these tankers right here ready to go. And then that EC-135, there were several bases. Ellsworth was one of them, that at a certain time they would trade off. It was in 8-hour cycles, where your EC-135 would take off. And basically would have a brigadier general on board with the nuclear launch codes. And for whatever reason, that military command structure, with, of course, the president being commander-in-chief, if that was somehow compromised, that particular individual could still launch and direct a nuclear response. Yeah. So that went on until '89, which, of course, the wall came down in Germany, and literally, the first President Bush, H.W. Bush, took everything off of nuclear alert. So all those B-1s came off of nuclear alert, all those tankers came off. We certainly used them for many other things, but they came off of nuclear alert because it was interesting, when they were still on alert, they'd have like what we call a klaxon. This alarm goes off, and no matter where these particular flight crew were for any of these aircraft, as well as ground crew that supported them, you would race to your particular aircraft, and then the whole idea is you launch it. So the last thing you wanted to see is actually one of those B-1s taking off, because their whole purpose at that time was to go drop a nuclear bomb on somebody. So, but we would do these klaxons and these practice, and they would fire up the aircraft, and they'd taxi them, and they would just, down the runway they'd go, and then they'd stop, and then they'd taxi back.
Okay.
So sometimes the tankers would take off, but yeah, none of the, because just like we were watching the Russian or the Soviets, they were obviously watching us, and we didn't necessarily want to have one of these B-1s, taking off per se, but we practiced all the time with what we call those klaxons to see how quickly could that plane be, basically how quickly could it take off. So, yeah.
Any fuel-related injuries?
Not necessarily injuries. I mean, anytime you're dealing with a vast amount, in any particular year, we're talking, 40, 50 million gallons of fuel just from, Ellsworth Air Force Base going into these planes. You're also dealing in very hot but very cold conditions in the winters and things like that. So we would have people, busting their butt, slip and fall, break a bone, things like that. We had issues with, different mechanical components would break and things like that, and you'd have fuel spills and stuff like that. So you'd obviously go into your fuel response. But unfortunately, some individuals, you get it in, you ingest it. Obviously, you're taking them to the hospital and that kind of thing. And this fuel has some additives that most fuel does not have. Some of your benzenes and your tetraethyl leads and some pretty nasty things, some corrosion inhibitors and things like that, because these aircraft are flying at 30, 40,000 feet at high speeds. So yeah, we would inject, we take in like a commercial grade jet fuel, and we inject all of these different types of additives to bring them up to military spec. But really, yeah, at Ellsworth, other than just, things happening because it's weather related, or we did have, because we did fuels, or we call it POL, which that's a long term, going back to like quartermaster in the Army and stuff like that. But petroleum, oil, and lubricants, and stood for a few other things, depending upon what branch you were working with, other branch of the military you're working with. But they had, we would also work with liquid oxygen and nitrogen. Extreme cold, minus 327, that type of thing. Well, of course, liquid oxygen, being 100% oxygen, can't come into any kind of contact with any kind of harder hydrocarbon. So, of course, naturally, it's one of the responsibilities of fuels management. So you get done offloading a tank truck, and you've got hydrocarbon, obviously residue on the bottom of your boots. You're up filling these liquid oxygen carts, which they would then take out to the aircraft, and they would be used to put into the aircraft, and then the pilots would ultimately breathe that through a converter and stuff like that. We wear special boots and special gear and things like that. However, you're done, you take off your special boots, you still have the residue on the bottom of your feet. That little blue, really cool, beautiful blue, bubble of that liquid oxygen is going down the concrete or whatever, you step on that, and we had several individuals, get the heel blown off their boot and stuff like that.
But not the leg.
Fortunately, it was always a small enough bubble, and we were always being told, for the love of God, don't step on the pretty blue bubbles, because obviously your hydrocarbon on your boots mixes with that 100% oxygen. And at other locations, people lose feet and stuff like that. So, no, we had a few scares, and then, of course, they get the real scare because then they have to explain why they did it. Occasionally it was an accident. Sometimes it's someone. Can it really do that? Yes, it most certainly did, especially when it lifts them.
They
into
wanted
the,
to try it out.
Oh, absolutely, especially when it blows them against the fence and they look down, they're missing the sole or the heel on their boot. So, yeah. But Ellsworth,
These are the guys that should have been flushed out.
Yeah, well, it's 19, 20-year-old guys. Don't do this. Well, naturally, what's the first thing you're going to want to do is, you're going to put it to the test. But, it was interesting, and being at Ellsworth, it was a good base, met some good people initially. When I got there, from basic to A school, now my first base, you're always training. So you're working on now your 5 skill level and things like that. And I found one of these old letters, which is kind of nice because it has 44th Strategic Missile Wing, which that was Ellsworth Air Force Base. That was the overall wing. But SAC, which is kind of neat. So, but it was just a letter for, I think, I was being promoted to airman December 17th, 1987. So I thought that was kind of cool. And still on the letterhead with SAC and that kind of thing.
Oh, neat. Let's hold that up.
So, yeah, that was
right there.
So that was kind of cool. But then the SAC
Oh.
crest. So it was a good thing. Some of the best advice I got early on was keep everything from a senior master sergeant. And I most certainly did. But now kind of going back through it. Because whether you're in for 4 years or 24 years or whatever the case is, it's just a lot of, more than likely it's going to be a rather meaningful period in your life. Even if you don't necessarily think so right now because you're young and you're focused on other things or whatever, at some point in time it most certainly will. And you only have one chance to keep all that stuff, and that's as you're kind of going through it. So that was excellent advice that he gave to everybody. Senior Master Sergeant Hill, I believe was his name. So anyway, and it's a good thing because now you go back, and a lot of people might know a little bit of history about SAC and that kind of thing, but to actually have been stationed at a SAC base and that kind of thing, for me, it's a special part.
Special part of history.
Absolutely.
This is the history part.
It is
you
history.
wanted to be a part of.
History
you were
is
making history.
There you go. Absolutely.
I read, and this was after you had left, but in 2008, they did the first, it was a B-1B,
Mhm.
did the first supersonic flight using synthetic fuel.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know what your opinion
Yeah.
is of an alternative kind of
Well,
thing.
I
This is
mean,
different than...
sure. I mean, basically, I mean, when
And that was at Ellsworth. Yeah.
when I was initially when the B-1B Bomber 2 came out in 88, 89, I mean, it was a program that had been cut under President Carter. President Reagan restarted it. But because we were behind the curve, it was developed as it was being produced. So initially the plane was not living up to expectations. It had 4 engines on it, and literally it was dropping engines in farmers' barns and stuff like that. Because when you look at South Dakota, a little bit of North Dakota there, you got southeastern Montana and northeastern Wyoming, I guess it is. It's a big bombing range. And these things were literally dropping engines off and things like that, and they had some definite performance issues back in the the late 80s. Since then, and we use them extensively in like Kosovo and that kind of thing, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But they definitely improved. But initially, they were they needed a lot of work. But the B-1B is an amazing aircraft. I remember when I was sitting down at night, because I usually work swings when I was at Ellsworth, and they would usually take off in a 2-ship formation, just as deep blue purple afterburner, and literally, I mean, it would just shake your insides. And of course, one goes and the other one goes fairly soon after. It's just absolutely impressive sight. And then, of course, knowing the payload that those things can take is just an amazing amount. It's an amazing weapon system. But the Air Force uses more fuel than any of the other branches. I mean, just it's absolutely amazing how many millions of gallons of fuel, just jet fuel, is consumed within the Air Force. If they can find a fuel that is that's exactly that doesn't diminish the aircraft's effectiveness, hey, absolutely go for it. especially if it's a safe fuel. When I first came in, we had what we called JP4. It's a kerosene-based fuel. Gives off vapors at all times. It's a very volatile fuel. Eventually, after I was in the service probably 10, 12 years at this point, they switched to a different type. It's more of a diesel-based, jet fuel. Because the idea is you can also use it to, put in your Abrams tank or your Humvee and stuff like that. But it was a much more stable fuel. But yeah, JP4 was a very volatile fuel. We always had to worry about, it's never the fuel, it's always the vapors and the explosions and things like that. So yeah, we were always extremely safety conscious.
But you never had that kind of thing take place.
We
in
never
your
had,
watch.
no, we were very fortunate there. Where I was at, because that is, the safety aspect of it is
Paramount.
Yes, absolutely.
How long were you at Ellsworth? 2 years?
No, actually, 87 until probably about 90 or about 92.
Okay.
And then I went from Ellsworth Air Force Base to Malmstrom
Okay.
Air Force Base, which is near Great Falls, Montana.
That was high profile, right? Kind of a high profile sort of place.
Malmstrom had, it did have one of the largest missile complexes. It was about 23,000 square miles, ICBMs. And we had some KC-135 tankers that were there, but they were always deployed. Because again, the tanker sitting on the ground doesn't do anyone any good. So they were always
Where
deployed.
would they be?
Usually they're going out to, maybe New Jersey and things like that, because obviously that way crossing the Atlantic and things like that, they're more forward. But yeah, they could have been in any number of European bases, Ramstein, that type of thing. So they're more forward deployed, if you will, than Malmstrom. Because a lot of your SAC bases were middle United States for obvious reasons. Easier to protect and more difficult.
For some of us.
Well, more difficult target and things like that. But also you had the land to build these big bases and these large missile complexes. So like Malmstrom, 23,000 square miles of all over central Montana. These ICBMs, multiple warheads, and basically what I did there was still in fuels management. So in addition to refueling the aircraft and that type of thing, we also would take fuel to all of these different, you had launch control facilities, and each launch control facility was responsible for 10 of these ICBMs. So you would go out there and make sure they had the fuel that they would need to operate 24/7. At the launch control facility, that's where, if anyone has ever seen war games or that type of thing, where you've got your two missileers down there who literally turn the keys and launch the missiles. But up top you have a lot of security forces for obvious reasons. That would respond to, basically they would keep their control facility and then their 10 locations where the missiles were, the silos, if you will, they were responsible for all that. And then you've got someone who kind of operates everything, make sure, they get fed and all that kind of thing. But yeah, so we take fuel out to them. So, and of course, it's got to get out there regardless of whether it's cold, hot, whatever it is. Montana's, central Montana is known to get quite a bit of snow and get pretty cold and that kind of thing. One kind of interesting story, a friend of mine who was security forces at the time, and a friend of hers and another security forces member, they were checking out an alarm at one of the missile silos, and she had to go to the bathroom. So, her partner goes back to the truck, she goes around kind of out of view, squats down there, but the wind blows her against that fence. Now, this was December, January time frame, and she literally, the small of her back freezes to the fence.
Oh, geez.
So he's in the truck going, okay, great. It's been a while now. Do I go back out there? Great. Now,
It's kind of hard to believe.
Yeah, a little is like, okay, what's going on? But after a while, it's like, okay, obviously something is wrong. So he goes out there. Sure enough, she's stuck to the fence.
So that's going to peel everything off.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure she probably still has a nice, crisscross pattern. But, so they call it in, and they're in literally a camper truck, one of the slide-in, for a pickup. So they warm water and stuff like that and pour it, on her back. But, yeah, it still took off some hide and things like that. So just, when it's cold like that, even what you think is kind of a routine little thing, no, nothing's routine when it's that cold. So, but I was only there for a couple years. Loved it. The area around Great Falls is absolutely beautiful. It was kind of strange because even I was from Montana, when I was stationed at Malmstrom, I was actually further from home than when I was stationed in South Dakota. Just kind of the layout of the bases, and yep, absolutely. Yeah, Malmstrom was good. I was
You were young at that point.
oh yeah,
Did
yeah,
you
was
get
still
homesick?
young. Well, I was at that time. I'd been promoted a couple times, so I had a little bit of rank, so I was able to go back for Christmas, Thanksgiving, things like that. Or my family was able to come up and visit, on occasion, stuff like that. So no, not really, homesick. And you stay so busy that that's kind of hard, to get homesick. But I was married at this time.
When did you get married?
Well, actually, I was married at Ellsworth. It's kind of interesting because there's a chapel on Ellsworth, and when we got married, we were married in that chapel. Well, my uncle, Kent, and my aunt Diane, when they were married, when he was in the Air Force, many years before me, stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and were married in the same chapel.
Aw.
So that was kind of cool. But yeah, so then we went from Ellsworth to Malmstrom, and that sort of thing.
So where did you live as a married couple?
On base. Ended up getting divorced, and then of course she went on her way, and I moved out onto the economy, if we will, off of base. But I was only there for a couple years, and then I got stationed in Korea.
Yeah, the place you were mentioning
Yes,
earlier
yes,
as your favorite
yes.
location. Tell us about that.
Well, Kunsan Air Base, Republic of Korea. So it's on the west coast of Korea. It's kind of on a peninsula that's obviously on a peninsula. We had two squadrons of F-16s.
Okay.
And in Korea, you're always on a wartime footing because the North, they're absolutely insane. Their little mini subs are trying to infiltrate, because there was obstacles, amphibious obstacles and stuff like that. They're trying to infiltrate that to put someone on shore. Every once in a while, they put people in business, government, military, and whenever they get the call, to try to be disruptive. So every once in a while, one of these people is found out. That causes tensions with the North. One of their little mini subs runs aground, causes tensions with the North. They come across the DMZ and kidnap acorn farmers. Oh, okay, we're on alert again, because who knows what they're going to do. So yeah, they're. Yeah.
Why did they kidnap acorn farmers? They couldn't have wanted the acorns.
No, but it's hard to say. It's along the DMZ, and you've got the Joint Security Compound, and at one point, depending upon where you're at in the compound, it's a sidewalk that's about that wide, and that is the border.
Okay.
Between North and South Korea. And obviously the South Koreans have a big South Korean flag. And you can see across the DMZ a big North Korean flag. South Koreans thought we need a bigger flag, so they get a bigger flag. North Koreans go, oh, well, we got a bigger flag, so bigger flag. This went on and on. And then so now literally, you can see that North Korean flag. It might be 100 miles, but you can see it plain as day. So, just little things like that. But of course, you go into where they hold low-level talks. They'll come to the Joint Security Compound area there, and both sides will talk. Well, it's usually us, the Koreans, and then the North Koreans. Oh, could be, hey, why'd you come across and kidnap the acorn farmers? Kind of a thing. As opposed to a lot of this other stuff is handled, much higher up the chain. But or hey, you know what? We need to go into the DMZ because we need to cut down the trees, things like that. Because at one point, in the 70s, Americans would go out there and the North Koreans would come across, and they actually had one incident where several GIs were killed by the North Koreans. So anyway, they make sure they as little miscommunication as possible. But literally, it's got like the green tablecloths from, if anyone's ever watched the show MASH, about the Korean Wars, obviously filmed during Vietnam era, but it was about the Korean War, and those green tablecloths there they are. Kind of thing. But yeah, the North Korean guards would look in at us, and we'd look back at them, and you try to take pictures of them, they get upset and storm away and that kind of thing. But yeah, so very interesting, very kind of a surreal kind of a thing. learn kind of the history of just the joint security area there and that kind of thing. But Kunsan itself, like I said, we had two squadrons, 35th Fire Squadron and the
F-16s.
80th of F-16s. Juvats and the Pantons, that was just their call signs. But it was either hot and humid or cold and humid. And of
A
course,
lot of people get sick.
oh sure, and the humidity, especially when it's hot and humid like that. I mean, I got heat exhaustion. A lot of people, and we were either on alert, wargaming, or planning for the next war game. So wore a lot of chem gear. People throw up in their masks, their chem mask. Yeah, pretty nasty. That one's pretty much done. But just because it's you're not drinking enough water. It's just hot and humid, and people succumb because you still have to do your job. We still had to refuel aircraft, so you're still driving, you're still pulling hose, you're still doing all this heavy work and things like that. We'd also do what we called hot refueling, which the aircraft come up and their engines are still running. The pilot just has his foot on the brake, and you refuel the aircraft that way. So we use a little different mechanism to do that. As opposed to a truck and a hose, but it's kind of this articulated metal arm and things like that.
Which
But
we're taught never to do at the fuel pump.
yeah, well, yes, but this is a little different story. So it was very interesting. I mean that very clear mission.
Was that Operation Southern Watch? Is that what that was?
No.
No.
No. But I can get to Southern Watch
Okay, well, that's
just a
okay.
little
You don't
bit.
have to dive
So this actually Southern Watch, and you even had a Northern Watch, but that's in Iraq.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, which one was
Yeah.
this?
This was just every day in Korea,
Okay.
where you're, like I said, other than
Okay.
when I was helping plan the war for Kosovo, or actually in it for Iraqi freedom, being in Korea was definitely the most intense. Like I said,
Okay.
you're either doing your war game, which would
Yeah,
last
tell me more
for a
about
week
the
or
war
so.
games.
Well, basically, you have different. You harden your control facility. In other words, you're sandbagging, your camo netting, things like that. You disperse your refueling fleet, and you've got controller here. You got operators, that kind of thing. So security's way up. Everyone's dispersed. You're eating your MREs out in wherever you're at. I mean, it's you run through different scenarios. So you could have, and different people would play the part of the infiltrators. So they try to get on base. So they're trying to get through security forces, and then further on into base. So you're dealing with that. But you could have individuals come up and they wanted to see how you would respond, and they're kind of the part of what we call quality control. But they'd come up and they'd say there's two of you standing there doing whatever it is you're doing. But they go up and they hand a card to one person, and only that person can read it, and it says, you're dead. So they just collapse. So how does that other person react? Because the mission still has to go on.
Yeah.
Or, they have they're wounded in some way, so can you apply the tourniquet? Maybe it's, the scenario is some kind of chemical attack. So are they able to inject their auto injectors? For nerve agents, you have these auto injectors, 2-pan chloride and atropine, and you carry them in your gas mask. The real ones when I was in the desert, these because we're just wargaming it. So you just run through these different scenarios, all while still doing your job. Rain, didn't matter. Korea, monsoons, rain for 3 days. Like I said, there weren't, very few people had cars, so you walked everywhere you went. So if it was monsoon, you were just wet. And you get to work wet, and you work while it's wet, and you go home or back to the barracks and that kind of thing. But because there were we were on a joint base with ROCAF, or South Korean Air Force, and that kind of thing. Well, we would do some things with them. They'd much rather rely on us than vice versa. But they had what we call binju ditches, which are kind of like open sewers. So when you would have a monsoon and those ditches were full, you did not want to fall into a binju ditch at any time, especially not during monsoon season, because God only knows what you would have contracted from that.
Yeah. I mean, I would just think being in the vicinity was dangerous.
It probably wasn't the most, hygienic type of thing, but, it was what it was. But no, Korea itself, other than Kunsan, you start getting into, it's a small country, but you start getting to central, and then the further north you go, you get in the mountains, and some of the maple trees, especially in the fall, absolutely beautiful with their temple. Most of the people were very friendly. You did have some students, usually on Fridays, they would come and protest because they wanted reunification with the North, although they had really no idea what that meant, and how that would utterly destroy, destroy, the South Korean economy and that kind of thing. But whatever. But yeah, almost every Friday they'd be out there protesting and that kind of thing. Everyone, and town would be put off limits and different things like that. Yeah, we didn't have any. I mean, other than people, having heat exhaustion, heat strokes, the occasional, more serious, ding or damp because you're doing what you're doing. We had a Army Patriot missile battery there, so we had Army folks as well. Only maybe 75 or 100, so not too many of them. But and then ROCAF and all of us Air Force. So yeah, it was a very easy base to understand what your mission was. North Korea attacks.
Sounds kind of tense, though, was it? Or
Oh, it was always tense. Yeah, because like I said, it was, other than being in combat, it's as real as it's going to get. But that was the whole idea, to make it that way. So you figure out of any given, say, 30-day month, easily 7 to 10 days was spent actually during some kind of war game. And all in preparations for what we called a SERI, which is like a combat employment readiness exercise. Or they come in from Hawaii, from PACAF, which is Pacific Air Forces, come in from headquarters, and they put you to the test. And they observe how well you do with these different scenarios and everything. And we always did exceptionally well. Well, that's because we practiced very hard all the way up to that point. And like I said, the North, they would do various things like I talked about. We'd be on alert, not knowing what they were going to do. One thing that'll probably always stick with me is, hot refueling when it's snowing, which is amazing. Aircraft, snow all around. Of course, you got aircraft engine running, you're refueling it, snowing. It's actually kind of pretty. Just kind of that thrum of that jet engine and stuff like that. The maple trees, definitely beautiful. Some of the smells, most certainly, will linger. But
sewage ditches.
Yeah, sewage ditches. You go down to
Kimchi.
town, and kimchi can be rather, potent. Yes, very much so. But there's like 500 different varieties. If you don't like one, go try another one. But yeah, they would certainly do it, and they'd have it up on their. Sometimes they'd bury it. Sometimes they'd put it in these clay pots up on top of their homes and things like that. When you're driving down the road, they would dry different things along the road, like these just really insanely hot red peppers, and just mile after mile these red peppers along the road and stuff like that. Went to a couple, like the local governor would sponsor a particular dinner for GIs, and go and you try all these different authentic Korean dishes and stuff like that. And some were good, some not really sure what it was, but certainly wasn't going to insult them. They invited us, and
Other than that, did you socialize a lot with?
not so
folks?
much. No, I mean, there's what we call A-Town. I try to stay away from A-Town.
A-Town is. Oh well, maybe.
No. It's American Town. Between the base, they're around a lot of bases that are overseas. But this particular here, GIs can go blow off some steam, have some fun, very easily get into trouble with a local gal, and that kind of thing. So try to avoid that as much as possible, because that was just you could have a good time right up until you were in jail, or something like that. So. Yeah, tried to avoid that as much as possible. Went there a couple times. I was like, okay, this is, I'm good.
What do you think's wrong with the North Koreans?
Well, I think, most of our people have no idea. Completely brainwashed, have been for decades. The leadership, you figure they have no food, unless you're in leadership, government, military, whatever it is. Also has such strict control. If you offer that contrary point of view, you're dead. So, it tends to silence people and keep people in line. I mean, it's definitely one of the last, true communist countries around. And the whole failed socialist, communist system, they're pretty much a, example as to why this does not work type of a thing. But they're not going to give up control, even if they watch their people die, daily because of no food, or, they would have floods and hey, we're going to have a good wheat crop, and then there was a flood, and it would wipe a lot of it out. So I'm sure a lot of the, the aid going in there had USA written on it, while at the same time we're pointing guns at them when they're pointing guns at us. So I think, unfortunately, they're not going to give up that particular system, those few that actually have that control, because what's going to happen to them? I mean, they've killed their people, imprisoned their people for decades. So there's really only one thing that could happen to them, firing squad, prison, something like that.
Beheading.
Yeah, well.
It's more Middle Eastern.
Yeah, more Middle Eastern, yeah. So it's really hard to say.
MO.
Yeah, they're not going to give up control, unfortunately. And, they've basically just kind of ruined the whole economy of their country. So that's a tough pickle. And obviously they haven't changed. They just, and another problem is it stays in the same family. So it's just like lunatic after lunatic after lunatic is in control. So, but as opposed to the South, where we went in and rescued it and said, hey, here you go, make it into the best economic engine in the, that whole sector along with Japan. And, look at it today. I mean, young kids over there, when I was there, you walk the streets and, hey, you bet, where can I get my $95 pair of blue jeans? I mean, that's what they're worrying about, as opposed to a counterpart up north where, hey, not enough rice to eat again. Oh, absolutely.
Very low on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, different priorities for sure. So, but Korea was good. I was there for about
do you have any pictures?
19 months of Korea. Yes, I do actually. Got a couple things in here. This one right here, just the 35th Fodder Squadron. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
This here is we were just getting ready to practice for a war game, so we're just going through making sure all your safeties are on your
What's up top?
M16. That's just that's headquarters, so the American flag and the South Korean flag.
Okay.
There. See if I can't get a picture. Oh, this is kind of interesting.
It's a dog.
We had a mascot. Yeah, we adopted this little guy here, JP.
What happened to him?
He's well.
Stays
I'm
for
sure he's
everybody?
dead now, but he just stayed there
Yeah.
because most people would come in about 12 months. I was there for 19 months, but yeah, he just kind of passed on. Little puppy, cute. We found him out in a ditch and adopted him, and he was very grateful. Just a good buddy of mine, who I'm still in contact with. When I was at Korea and things like that. You get to know people pretty well, and those relationships. This is just actually up towards, it's actually that North Korean flag. You could see it much clearer, but we're getting closer to the DMZ here, and the North Korean flag is there in the background. These here are just called revetments. You want to make your aircraft, and then whatever it is you're doing, refueling, rearming, you want to protect as much as possible. So they actually park between these revetments here, and then we refuel them, rearm them, that kind of thing. Okay. The snow and stuff like that, and this is just one of the exercises we were in. I was wearing my sexy glasses, so you could fit your gas mask over them.
Okay.
But just the F-16, absolutely amazing
How comfortable
aircraft.
is a gas mask? I've never had one on.
Initially, it's not too bad, but changes depending upon how much are you exerting, how much are you sweating. Try to drink through the drinking tube, which has a hose that connects to a special outlet on your canteen. It could be a little difficult and that kind of thing. But just here's the Patriot missile battery that was there to, hopefully shoot down whatever they shot or flew our direction. Here we're actually doing one of those hot refuelings right here. Again, protect the aircraft while they're going through that particular operation. So, but
What's on the bottom?
well, that's Mr. Pak. We had 10 Korean nationals. That was our main Mr. Pak. There's, very few surnames.
Give me those all.
Thanks. Thank you. Very few surnames. Mr. Pak is definitely very popular. But he was former Rock Marine, I believe, and that kind of thing. So, he was, generation that fought the war. But yeah, we had 10 Korean nationals that worked in our storage area, our fuel storage area. primarily for that
Did
continuity.
they report to you?
Not to me. I was more distribution, fuels control center kind of a thing. But they would report, to our GI that was in charge of storage. But he would, whatever needed to be done, they would get it done. They loved our MREs, so we trade with them different parts of their MREs and stuff like that if they were bringing in some kind of Korean dish that we liked and that sort of thing. So it was
Do you ever
good
keep in
experience.
contact with any of those folks?
Not with him. With
he would probably be tempted.
Yeah, well, it's been a while. But with a couple individuals, one in particular there, Mitchell, he actually, he just retired from the Air Force. At the time, I was a tech sergeant or an E6, and he was a senior airman or an E4. And I was, he was one of my controllers. And very good at his job and stuff like that. And we just kind of kept in touch with over the years. When I was in, for Iraqi freedom in Kuwait, and my unit was moving up to Baghdad, he was in Talil, Iraq, and stuff like that. And he just recently retired. He's got a couple kids, so I still call him. We all had call signs. We didn't use our names over the radio, so Doc was his. So I still refer to him as
Doc.
As Doc. Yeah.
Can you say yours?
Hallball. And that was, I got it because we were playing football in the hallway.
Okay. You were going to go to school for football, right?
Yeah, well, that would have been nice. And, there's a partial scholarship, St. Mary's, and who knows what would have happened there. But, we're playing football in the hall, which we shouldn't have been doing. But, it's I suppose there's a lot of other more destructive things we could have been doing. Basically, we're just beating each other up, running each other in the hall and hall ball, and that stuck for the 19 months I was in Korea. But one other thing that was kind of neat when I was there, I was there 96 to 98, and in 1997 I was named Pacific Air Force's Non-Commissioned Officer Supply Professional of the Year. So that was certainly an honor. Just that letter here from the commander of the 8th Fighter Wing. So that was good. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
For the work that I'd been doing, and fuels management fell under supply, and then logistics really. It was good. Let me see what else we got. I think, I don't know if you can see it, but received one of my Air Force commendation medals coming out of Korea.
Which one?
One of the which
Yeah,
commendation
yeah.
medal? This might have been second one. But it was just for my work as non-commissioned officer in charge of the Fuels Control Center. Talked about prepositioning equipment and personnel when we were doing our war games or when we would go on alert and that kind of thing. We would have response times. We'd have to get to the aircraft, and ours was 7 minutes, which
was the best?
The standard was 30 minutes, so we were well below
that's
that.
significantly better.
Headquarters PACAF Pacific Air Forces came out, and we received an excellent rating on our war readiness. Basically, how ready are you to fight whatever your mission is? And we received an excellent, outstanding, then excellent, and definitely down from there. So excellent was really good considering
So
where
this
we're
might
at.
begin to explain when I ask you why you were promoted so many times.
Oh,
and you were
yeah.
too modest, but this starts
Well,
to paint a picture of why.
Well, thank you. One thing, during that time frame that I was in Korea, because remember we just had 2 squadrons of F-16, so you're looking at probably maybe 24 to 30 aircraft thereabouts, but 670,000 gallons of jet fuel. This is during the that exercise where we received the excellent, but 670,000 gallons of jet fuel, 511 combat sorties. It was a good base, good folks. Got some recognition out of it, which certainly appreciated.
Hold that up so that we can see that.
All right.
A little closer here. And this one was
the
letter of congratulations.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So after Korea,
Yeah.
it was time to.
And what year? Let's place
96
ourselves.
to 98. So in February of 98, I PCS'd, or permanent change in station, and I went to Hill Air Force Base.
In Utah.
In Utah. So while I'm at Hill, initially I'm signed, I'm still in fuels management, so I'm assigned to the unit there. And that's the one where it had the 22 or so GIs and roughly the 20 civil service.
Right, this
where
is
we
the one
had
we
some,
spoke about
yeah,
earlier,
there was
where-
some issues.
What were the issues, or would you rather not elaborate?
Oh no, I mean basically, like I said, some of the GS were very good. I mean, the thing is though, when you get a GI and if they're not getting it done, you can take action, and then they either get it done or you send them on their way. Civil service, it's not that way. It's a very painful, cumbersome, long process to discipline and, if ultimately need be, terminate someone. So, but in the meantime, they're at work and they're drawing pay, and they can be causing quite a bit of disruption.
Yeah, and danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially given fuels. We did have one individual. I mean, this guy, he offered one of our airmen. They were on the flight line, so he's driving. It was one of our R9s, just the type of truck. It was a 5,000-gallon truck, and offered him a shot of whiskey out of his flask. Yeah. So those kinds of things. Or if it was winter, and we knew a big storm was coming in, because Hill Air Force Base, northern Utah, really all of Utah, but northern Utah, Salt Lake City area, Ogden, absolutely beautiful, Park City. But that wind coming through the canyons, extremely cold, lots of snow, comes across that Great Salt Lake, hits those mountains, the Wasatch Front, and just drops on you. So, summer or winter storm coming in, as soon as the snow starts falling, in the control center, you start getting calls from a couple folks who you figured probably would be calling anyway. I'm sick, I won't be able to come in. Well, it's because they didn't want to go out and work in the cold. So we just double up on our GIs.
Those are the civilians, right?
Yeah. So, and certainly not all of them were that way, but enough of them that certainly would impact operations, which was unfortunate. One of the good things that did happen while I was stationed at Hill, however, when I was still in fuels, was selected, and I went to USAF headquarters, USAF being United States Air Forces Europe, to Ramstein. And we finally had enough with Slobodan Milosevic in Yugoslavia. Actually, we call it FRY, former Republic of Yugoslavia, because obviously it had kind of dissolved. And his ethnic cleansing. The
Yeah, we should
Serbs,
describe that a little bit, because people won't.
really that whole area. Bosnia and Herzegovina, really before that, Croatia, that whole area over there. And you had, Serbs, Christians killing Muslims, back and forth. But at one point, basically the Serbs, Slobodan Milosevic, they definitely get the upper hand and have control in the government and the military and the paramilitary and the police. And there's a lot of ethnic cleansings. And where Operation Allied Force came in, this is 1999, so it's really March through June, July of 1999, we're going to remove him from power. And because they were killing all the ethnic Albanians in the province of Kosovo. So myself and it was 2 or 3 other individuals were brought over to augment the headquarters fuels staff.
And this was in Ramstein?
Ramstein Air Base, Germany.
Sorry.
Yeah. And basically we did the logistics planning on, we would look at, okay, how many fighter aircraft or tanker aircraft are going to try to operate out of Eskişehir, Bandashir, Turkey, or out of Tirana, Albania, or Hungary, or any.
And we had aircraft there.
Not yet.
Okay.
We were the ones who.
You're determining how many.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So your.
Site surveys.
Exactly. Your commander is going, hey, I need this type of aircraft at this location.
Okay.
Can we do it? So there were different teams that we would coordinate that went, ultimately it was like 50 or 51 different locations. Ruckus, Romania. The Air Force had absolutely nothing in Ruckus, Romania, but Romania is very close. So different, places that were, we had no footprint in, to places like Aviano, which is already a large Air Force base. All right. and we would determine, how many more aircraft or how many aircraft we could put at these locations. So, for me, my favorite was Prague. Absolutely beautiful city. Again, this is 99, so it's just 10 years.
That was just a site assessment, though, right? We didn't end up going there?
No, we did not. And so we're trying to, they really want to, join NATO. So in communication, we want to put, as an example, say we want to put 5 KC-135 tankers in there. We know how much fuel they're going to use because we know what their mission is going to be. Well, in communication with them, quickly discover we're going to use every drop of fuel they've got at their national airport. Okay, that isn't going to work for them. Well, we can bring fuel in. We'll set up our bladders. We dig, berms. We lay berm liners. We put these 10,000 or 50,000 gallon tanks in there, fill them with fuel that we bring in. No, because when the Soviets were there, they, rape, pillage, plunder. Wherever they were at. And the Czechs did not want any major environmental issues or anything like that. So even though they really wanted to join NATO, they just really couldn't. They didn't have the capabilities that we needed. So we just said thanks, but no thanks. But we looked at places like in Tirana, which is Albania.
Okay.
And literally on opposite sides of the runway, you had Operation or Joint Task Force Hope, which was for the humanitarian effort. Yep, refugees. And then on the other side, Joint Task Force Hawk. And the Army had somewhat of a footprint for Operation Allied Force. President Clinton said no ground troops, so they were kind of limited, very limited in what they could do. Oh, completely air war. Very intense air war, 79 days. We lost an F-16, was shot down. F-117 stealth fighter was shot down. The pilots were rescued because they would run combat search and rescue out of Bari, Italy. But what we would use the Army for is we would ferry fuel from Bari over to Tirana. And then,
so where were our base? Where did you? What sites were selected then?
Oh, well, there ended up being about 25 or 26 of them.
Okay.
So it could have been like Aviano Air Base where we plussed it up, or it could have been in let's see, there were like Bandar and one other place in Hungary. We plussed up in Turkey, with fighter aircraft, that kind of thing. Tirana was another. So there ended up being 25 of these sites. Many of them were set up specifically for this operation, this bombing campaign.
And were you responsible for all 25 sites, making sure that they had what they needed?
I played my part in it. Yeah, it's because there's security forces, and really it's logistics, operations, people flying the aircraft, maintaining the aircraft. Right. People keeping it secure, and then logistics. Do they have what they need to do the job? Of which primarily fuel.
I read at some point there were, maybe this is wrong, but 1,000 aircraft over there.
I would.
More.
I'm not exactly sure how many aircraft. I do know. Let me hand you a couple things here that.
Okay.
What we did is in all this planning. I received a Air Force Commendation Medal.
Again.
Again. For the work.
It's getting redundant.
Yeah, well, I was blessed to work with some really good people and allow me to do some good things. But April 9th, 1999 to July 31st, 1999. But basically, this is Operation Allied Force. Helped sustain forces required to repel Serbian aggression against ethnic Albanians during the 81-day air campaign. His contributions to supply management of 74 mobility readiness spares packages, and I'll explain that, valued at over $730 million, and the development of procedures to support new locations. In addition, helped overcome daunting fuel limitations at 25 bed-down bases through the deployment of 340 fuels personnel. So we would go back, to the States and in some other European bases, and would move those people into one of these other 25 sites. Exactly. In those, as well as $25 million in fuel assets, so that could be trucks, it could be mobility systems, those bladders, which also have filters, hoses, you name it. things that connect to the aircraft, that kind of thing. In the delivery of over 250 million gallons of fuel. Now, keep in mind that's 250 million gallons in 81 days.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty major operation. It supported 500.
Yeah, I found that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
250 million gallons.
Yep, supported 563 aircraft, which for the U.S. came to roughly 17,477 Air Force sorties. So it's either combat sorties or those, in-flight refuelings that are so important to everything that we
How do you
do.
get that much fuel there?
Well,
Let's look at these.
so a lot of it is either coming from the countries that we're in, I mean most of it, or the U.S. is bringing it in. But a lot of it is, the countries that we are in, we're using what would have went to maybe their national airport or even their own military. Maybe that was their contribution to the war effort is, all right, we're not going to do anything, but
We're
we
not
will
fighting,
give you
but
our
here's-
fuel.
yeah.
Absolutely. So, but no, I mean, absolutely amazing people worked with there. We would go down into where all the cells were at, ops and security and logistics, and just massive TVs on one side of the wall, and then on the other side, and this is like 4 stories underground. On the other side, you've got these large, like picture window, but they're sliding glass doors basically. And General Jumper, John Jumper, who was the USAF headquarters, but he was in charge of the overall air war. So he would come in, and we would brief, and better have your stuff right. We'd go through intel briefs. We already knew what was going on was, absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
One
So
is
there's no question. Well, was that very clear mission?
Oh, absolutely. Literally, they set up concentration camps. After Allied Force was over, and I was still at Ramstein, I went to Dachau, which is Munich,
Yeah.
and walked through there. And they have very chilling, very haunting. No one's running, or it's certainly not Disneyland by any means. And they have this large memorial with a lot of the metal that was in it it's like a barbed wire fence with someone trying to get through. But there's a large marble, contains all the ashes that were left. And in like 5 or 6 different languages, it basically says never again. Which, of course, there we are, 1945, and here we are 1999,
Again.
and Slobodan Milosevic and the Serbs
Doing
have
it
their
again.
concentration camps and ethnic, killing. Literally, you'd have individuals, they'd make the children do the sign of the cross. Obviously, I'm Catholic, and the Serbs, same way. However, if they were not, went right to left, could be very bad news, just depending upon, and that was one way to get, because it's just reflexive.
Okay.
Make the sign of the cross.
I don't know it. I'm
And-
Episcopalian.
Oh, wow, hey, that's a whole different discussion. But literally, that's how some of, he had, not so much his military, but his paramilitary and his thugs, basically, his rapists, that would help them ID people. It's pretty, they would have rape houses.
Whoa.
That's plenty, obviously, that, hey, it's time for you
It's
to
enough.
go. But there was one particular case where they had this, I don't know how old he was, couldn't really tell, because all they had left was his head. And they used that to play soccer.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. So
It's like the Middle Ages. They put the heads
a
on
lot
posts,
of
though.
hatred from centuries and centuries that they had not let go of. And when Tito was no longer had his thumb on everybody, when that was, he died and communism kind of dissolved, all these things came back up, and the Serbs eventually got, the upper hand, and they were exacting a lot of revenge. But yeah, very, very, very brutal. So you had one, Arkan's Tigers, and they were a paramilitary group, and just absolutely barbarians in their treatment of well, I say other human beings, that would give them credit for being human beings, and that's not what they deserve. So, but they're dead now, and Kosovo is much better off than the ethnic Albanians and things like that. So, we did a lot of good work, and a lot of people are alive. Oh,
What's this?
Well, that right there actually.
That's Wichita Falls.
Yeah, Wichita Falls. Some of the different training I was talking about.
Yeah.
You get your different skill levels and things like that. Well, at one point in time, this would have been probably. It might have been when I was first at Hill. I got my 9 skill level, which is superintendent level, and that training was at Wichita Falls,
Is that your group?
Texas. And this is my class that I graduated with. So good group of folks, and that was really the whole a lot of strategic planning and things like that when it comes to fuels and other logistics and how everything plays together and that type of thing, which certainly came in handy when I ultimately went to Ramstein. But so anyway, Operation Allied Force, it was definitely a meaningful time. There's a lot of work, a lot of good folks. Like I said, we had F-16 shot down, F-117, but the pilots were rescued. The B-1B kind of came of age because it no longer, it was converted from the nuclear payload that it was originally designed for during the Cold War, and was used quite a bit during Kosovo and Allied Force. So, but anyway, came back and eventually became the superintendent of the fuels flight there at Hill. They asked me at one time, to go back again because things were kind of heating up. Asked me to go back to Ramstein and USAF headquarters, but my powers that be said, "No, we got to keep him here." So I didn't go back a second time. But eventually, we're kind of getting to the point where, hey, it's time to do something else.
Okay.
Fuels was good, met some good folks, things like that.
Did you want to do something else, or did
I wanted to do something else, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and like I said, it was good. I mean, like here, again, Allied Force, but this is, from General Gabreski, she was the Brigadier General in charge of all of logistics there at Ramstein. So a nice letter of appreciation from her. And because this was a NATO operation, U.S., with little NATO, but NATO was in there. So NATO, which is certainly kind of unique. And then these are
Noble
just...
Anvil.
Yeah, and this is just the member countries for NATO, and that actually goes along with the NATO medal. And depending upon what operation you served in, then you get the bar. In my case, former Yugoslavia, and that kind of thing. So anyway, I'll give that to you. But so a lot of good things happening in fuels, but I think it's time to do something different. And at this point, I've moved up through the ranks. I'm an E7 or a Master Sergeant in the Air Force, and I wanted to go into special duty as a First Sergeant. So unlike a functional fuels management or something to do with the aircraft or anything, when you're First Sergeant,
not operations.
this is you're operational minded, but it's all about the people. You are basically responsible for all the enlisted force within your particular unit. So when I was a First Sergeant, some of my units might have had 350 people. To when I was with the 729th Air Control Squadron, we had roughly 550 people. All right, so you're responsible for all the enlisted folks, and 85-90% of the folks in your units are enlisted. So my first, so anyway, I was selected to become a First Sergeant.
What's the selection process?
Well, for me, back then, it's changed a little bit, but for me, they're looking at your performance reviews.
Which we know about.
Yeah, and your, what have you done, basically? Is there potential there? You have to be recommended from your commander and because they are losing you. I mean, you're literally changing from your old
Area.
Air Force specialty to a new one, so they're losing you, and they have to recommend that for this. The senior enlisted person on the base reviews everything and goes, yes, this is someone we need and we want, because first sergeants fulfill a fairly unique
Role?
niche. Yeah, absolutely. As an example, when I was at Hill Air Force Base, there's thousands, I don't know, 8,000, active duty. It's also a large depot base. They do major maintenance on aircraft there and that kind of thing. Those are mainly civil service folks, but there was a large contingent of active duty. You might have, say, Chief Master Sergeant, which is an E9. It's the highest enlisted rank. Out of those 5, 6, 7,000, you could have 250 chiefs. You had 20 first sergeants. So if you want something done, you went to the first sergeants. If it's good, bad, or otherwise, your first sergeants are dealing with it when it comes to people. Who gets promoted and when? Are they going to the appropriate higher level schools, especially professional development? You're reviewing all personnel evaluations. Is someone not meeting the physical training standards? Did they get in trouble? Did they get a DUI, drugs, abuse their wife, abuse their kids, something more heinous than that? That you're dealing with this. You do a lot of, with the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you are the advisor to the commander. Your chain of command as a first sergeant is very short. It's you and the commander.
Did you like that?
Absolutely. You bet. Absolutely. Because within a unit, like when I was with the 729th, there were a couple chiefs, E9. So technically they outranked me. But they have to go through an ops or maintenance officer or two, and then deputy commander, and then commander. I walk across the hall to the commander, and there it is. You want to have good relationships with those senior enlisted within your units, but sometimes maybe they were the issue. So you've really your first sergeant group, and there's like 20 of us. That's who you socialize with and that kind of thing. Not the people in your unit, because you may end up having to recommend some kind of. You need to make sure you keep clear lines.
Okay.
So they look at, are you capable of doing that? They interview you. You have to go before a mock panel where you've got a colonel, and then you've got several senior or very experienced first sergeants, and they pepper you with all kinds of questions. How are you going to deal with a member who's suicidal, type of thing. How are you going to deal with the commander comes in and they've been drinking, that kind of thing. Then in my case, they also interviewed my wife. Hey, will you be okay with him being on call 24/7? That call from a female airman at 3 o'clock in the morning, that kind of thing. So you get selected, then you go to the Air Force First Sergeant Academy, which is in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. Liked Alabama. I did like Alabama. It was, I'm a big Roll Tide, but it can get pretty hot and humid. I mean, 6 in the morning, and you're already, when you're running, like sucking.
But not as bad as Korea.
No. But anyway, I graduated from the Air Force First Sergeant Academy. In fact, I was fortunate enough that I was the distinguished graduate from the First Sergeant's Academy. So there's just the diploma for that. And then the diamond denotes a first sergeant. And I started out when I was an E7 or that master sergeant, ultimately retired as that senior master sergeant. Very few chief master sergeants that are also first sergeants, even less today. And I knew that was going to be the case. So it would have been nice to retire as a chief, but I wanted to retire with a diamond because the diamond meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
So.
And it should be noted, as I noted in the introduction, that this is considered by many to be one of the most difficult promotions to attain.
Especially senior master sergeant is very difficult to get to. So, that's why when I was actually out here, and it was 2007, I'd had 20 years. I'd had E8 senior master sergeant on for a couple years. And but I was dating a California girl from Burbank, my wife, and I knew if I was get promoted to E9, you owe them X number of years more. This means more PCSs, means more deployments. Because 2007, the surge is going on. Wasn't too sure how that would work. And the reason for that is because when I was, still back at Hill Air Force Base, and I was now a first sergeant, my first unit was a component maintenance squadron. So they did internal fuel systems, jet propulsion, engines, egress, the ejection seats, things like that. Good unit, absolutely loved it. I had a couple good commanders there. In fact, I don't know if you can see it. We'll probably pan into it, but
Yeah,
that
we'll pick it up.
that guidon right there was the commander gave it to me. Commanders don't give their guidons away. That's their guidon. But I was his first sergeant. And so anyway, when I moved on to my next unit, he gave that to me and learned a lot. That was my first unit, the component maintenance squadron. But that was also when I was first sergeant there. 9/11 occurred. It was like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, driving to work. This goes on. My then wife, number 2, my then wife. And I literally, obviously that was September. In August, we had our anniversary, and we were in New York. So beautiful skyline, Twin Towers, absolutely gorgeous. And I remember telling myself driving in, going, there's no way it was an accident that someone flew a plane into that tower. No way. Can't happen. And then, of course, everyone, second one, Pennsylvania, obviously the Pentagon and everything. So obviously that's 2001, and everyone wants to go. Okay, but the question is, go where? So we got to figure that out. Of course, October that year, wasn't too long after that, and Operation Enduring Freedom starts, Afghanistan as well as other operations around the world. And then we get into 2002, and Operation Enduring Freedom is going. Taliban's on the run, Al Qaeda, all that kind of good thing. And then things are getting hot, though, for Iraq. And one day the senior enlisted manager for the base calls and says, I need you to go to the 729th Air Control Squadron. They deploy in 5 days, and they go into Kuwait. And we have no idea how long you're going to be there, but you have a pretty good idea on where things are headed. Okay. So I did. Literally, I said, goodbye to the old squadron, and went over to, and literally, you're getting to know what an air control squadron does. And I actually have the flag here from the unit, the 729th. Let me see here.
Here we go.
Can you see, can you see it there? So, best in the field, that's our...
Stockbrokers, no.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. So, basically what an air control squadron is it's a command and control asset, command and reporting. In other words, secure communications, but we would also have what we were responsible for, if I can hand that to you. We would have individuals who operated radar, and we would have, basically it's a completely self-contained unit. We had a sniper, we had cooks, we had people who, and we'd convoy everywhere we went. So 5 tons, that kind of thing, type of vehicle. I'll show you a picture here in a bit. So people to maintain the radars, to maintain the vehicles, to provide security, to feed everybody, medics, that kind of thing. And then on the operations side, you would have individuals who, they were radar, so they would...
So you're in constant movement, you're saying?
Well, we could be, but usually, we get someplace, we convoy to what the forward edge of the battle, the FEB, and so we can use the radar to look into, in this case, Iraq.
Okay.
But really, the country's divided into these air defense sectors, and you've got Air Force people that are looking at these radars, and they know what kind of F-16s are flying around that they can send, that fly CAP missions, Combat Air Patrol, which they don't do it all that often anymore, but certainly right after 9/11, they did it on the Olympics, around the election, that kind of thing, where they high-value targets. Okay, so Air Control Squadron is looking to see what what do the bad guys have? Our weapons directors know what kind of weapon systems we have. A B-1 with 2,000-pound joint direct attack munitions, or an A-10, or an F-16, or British Tornado. So we work with, like the Predator. And when we were deployed to Al Salim a couple weeks before Thanksgiving of 2002, Predator unit was there out of Vegas. And at that time, 2002, I mean, you've got operators as well as maintainers there. Whereas now the maintainers may be, deployed, but your operators are in Virginia or out in, Vegas. But everyone's together back then. So literally in our operations center, we would see what the Predator sees. And basically it was our job to, you find these things. Or if they're found, because we would work with tactical air control parties or special forces that are out looking for different things, or even just other units, and if they're taking some kind of fire, they would work that through us. What is there that can basically help these guys and gals on the ground? So we spent a lot of time watching he could only, like Saddam could only fly one, I think it was a DC-9,
Okay.
from Baghdad to Basra once a day. That was it. We called it the B-2B, and had to be a certain time, and we would watch, making sure that it was that type of aircraft at that time. Every once in a while, he'd send up a fighter, and it'd fly above the commercial aircraft, try to mask it, and we'd have to, is this what he's doing that day? Because then we'd want to send in an F-16, because he wasn't allowed to do that. In Operation Southern Watch, which was protecting southern Iraq.
Right.
Okay, primarily at the time after the first Gulf War, so this goes back to 91,
Right.
where they had the Southern Watch and then the Northern Watch, kind of like the southern tip and then the northern tip of the country, because you had, like the Kurds or whatever, or there were buffer zones where Saddam Hussein could not operate in, or if he did, we could blow him up, or whatever the asset was. In build up to ultimately when the war started in March of 2003, we're looking all throughout Iraq, in particular southern Iraq. What does he have that he says he doesn't have, but we do? And sure enough, we see where he's got drones, because we see it on our radar.
Yeah.
What
other things did you see?
Oh, well, he's not supposed to have different types of medium and long-range missiles, which he certainly did, because at one point in time he's shooting them at us. But because whenever he would fire a missile, we could tell by the plume, the speed, well, really the speed and that kind of thing, what type of missile it is, because then in our control, and I'll show a picture of it in a second, they would be able to intercept, but put the area responsibility at a particular alarm level.
Okay.
In other words, MOP level 4. You've got all of your chemical protective gear on. Okay? So we would know what he's firing so that we could then best advise on what kind of alarm condition. Or we'd see what he's flying. Yes, it can be there. Or all the myriad of American and other coalition partner aircraft. Who's flying what? Where are those tankers at? Who needs that fuel? What weapons are still remaining to help out the guys on the ground? Or Predator, we see, we chased what we call spoon rest, which is like a tactical with a radar, truck with a radar in the back of it. Because he learned from the first, from the Gulf War, don't have stuff stationary, it doesn't last long. Well, it doesn't last long if you move it around either. So we would chase those around whenever we'd see it, you destroy it. Opal vans, which was like a Winnebago with communications equipment in it.
Okay.
Kind of like a mobile command. So we chase those around. He would put surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, next to mosques, schools, things like that. And then, individuals on the ground would go, yeah, I think we can get that, and then work with, through my guys on the aircraft, what type of munition best to take that out. If it could be. If it was too close and you didn't want that collateral damage, you couldn't take it out. They would still shoot at our aircraft, but you couldn't take it out. So that's kind of what an air control squadron does. Is everyone that supports that mechanism, from keeping us safe to feeding us. As a first sergeant.
Yeah, I was going to say, what kind of issues were you facing over there at the time?
Obviously, you deal with everyone who's, you've got the anxiety and everything that's going along with, hey, this is ramping up. This is not a normal deployment. What's going on? So you're dealing with that. Individuals, so not so much disciplinary issues because we knew kind of where this was going before we even left. So people were pretty much handpicked. Don't take a problem with you because why would you? But when I was there, it's making sure we went through a lot of training, chemical control, going through, if you're contaminated, going through from dirty to clean and coming back in because, hey, still got to do the work, right, even if it's slimed. All right, so, that kind of training. Making sure, go through and defensive fighting positions around our different, around the radar bunker, command bunker, around the different assets that we'd have dispersed out. So filling a lot of sandbags and making sure people are filling sandbags, and they're basically preparing, whether it's on personal training, equipment, for when we no longer can prepare because it's actually here. And then you're just dealing with issues. So and so, you get the Red Cross call. So and so's wife, had a baby. Great. Make sure you can call home. Or so-and-so's father passed away. Sorry. You're going to miss the funeral. Or anyone who gets injured. All right, can they be treated where we're at, or do they need, because at Kuwait City International, you had the international airport, and then you had massive military, and you had a combat Army surgical hospital there. Or did they need to go there? I had guys in Doha, which is port, and that's where all kinds of Army. And it was south of us on the coast, obviously, and it was a port, and anything was coming in by ship. So I would go down there. I had some guys that operated secure satellite communications, so I'd go down, check on them every once in a while. Or I'd go to the airport to pick up a courier or drop someone off, that kind of thing.
Which you liked. I remember you telling me that because.
Absolutely, because I didn't want to get bored on base. I wanted to, certainly safer on base, but I would have went absolutely stir crazy, just being confined, to the base. Especially since when we got there in November of 2002, we had about 1,300 people. Come, February, we had 13,000 people there. We laid what we call AAA, it's Rapid Runway Repair. Basically, it was the steel matting so that all these Marine Corps Super Cobras could land. We had all kinds of special ops there. We had, it all plussed up because that was an issue where a lot of things were going to push north. So you've got to deal with those issues. How does this little teeny tiny base go from 1,200 to 13,000 and not have everybody kill each other? Because obviously you got a lot of people walking around with guns. And very close quarters.
I want to touch back on an issue that you brought up earlier in our conversation, but that has to do, I read the statistics, and this would have been your responsibility at the time, and you were also involved in this, but the Air Force has the highest divorce rate of any branch of the military. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, thoughts on divorce or thoughts on? Yeah, I got you. Yeah, no, I got thoughts on divorce, but because
you can tell us that too.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. What that is all about. Not knowing what the the stats are on like the marriage rates are within each of the branch. More Air Force people get married, therefore more get divorced. I don't know. All I know is that was definitely one of the things I would deal with is. We had 6 or 7, in addition to babies being born and parents dying and, all kinds of things. And either, yes, you can go home, no, you can't, make the phone call. And then you still have to support them. And they still have to have their head in the game to do the job. We had probably 6 or 7 individuals get Dear John letters. And of course then, you deal with that because obviously
the morale is low.
Yeah, morale. You got an issue. Myself in May of 2003 got the Dear John letter. Who does the first sergeant go to? That's so.
God God.
It's just, well, yeah, he's certainly involved. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, really, I mean, you just, you suck it up. You're a professional. I mean, we had everyone, from your, early 20s to, certainly older than that, and everyone just, professional and do your job. So, I would deal with all those, personnel issues, not just within my unit, but larger as well, because there were very few first sergeants. In fact, one of the individuals for the security forces on base, they had a first sergeant, and he was actually, Gary graduated with me from the First Sergeant Academy, so we were first sergeants together. And sure enough, then obviously went our separate ways until we ran into each other at Ali Salim. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, you got to deal with, you're dealing with other, branches, sometimes other nationalities, because it involves, that particular location, everyone trying to live together in kind of a strange thing, because you're building bunkers and you're doing your drills and things like that. Plus, you're actually what we call response actions. In other words, we're watching Saddam at the time, and is he doing something he's not supposed to, which he did all the time, and then what can we send to intercept and things like that. And it was just, a lot of it was games and that kind of thing. And then just obviously getting your people prepared for when it happens. Of course, we've got intel in the unit, so we knew exactly when it was going to happen, and sure enough, March 19th, I believe it was, at night, and sure enough, you can hear the Tomahawks going over. It was interesting because on our intel boards and everything was, red, green, red, yellow, green. Red means they're at full strength, or green means they're at full strength, and we want to work them down to red where they're no longer a factor. And just, over the days of just relentless pounding, you'd watch these different units, whether they were Republican Guard, Fedayeen, paramilitary, kinds of things. You'd watch these different troop levels go down, and I remember one hellacious sandstorms. Just turned the sky like burnt pumpkin. I mean, orange, black. It was kind of weird. Sand, of course, gets in everything. Food, sleeping bag, whatever, gets in everything. But this huge, the pushes going on up north, haven't made it to Baghdad yet. Sandstorm. So they're thinking they're going to get some respite. Technology and training and weapon systems being what they are, the ground units can still move, but our air assets, that doesn't mean anything. If we can get a GPS on you, doesn't matter if there's smoke, whatever's between us and you. And that sandstorm, and it went on for a couple of days, and everyone, they're at green, and then that sandstorm clears, and a lot of those units are just utterly decimated by bombings. They're yellow, red, and stuff like that on the board. So I don't know. Maybe we can see a picture of one of our sandstorms here. It was kind of neat. So a lot of people are staying, obviously in tents. Oh yeah, they had some nasty, snakes, scorpions,
Marmots?
Typical things. Yeah, we call this a dub. Have no idea if that's what the name of it was, but it was a lizard in various sizes. That one's pretty big. They also had, camel spiders. You hear a lot of weird things on the internet about camel spiders, but
what do you got here?
it's a air conditioner.
No, I mean the whole.
Oh, just a tent city, and different unit members, or there'd usually be 10 or so people in a tent, type of a thing. See if anything.
That's not poisonous because it doesn't have a pointed head, right?
What?
The snake.
That one. Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, everything over there bites you or stick you. But you see here, pretty good size. This guy's actually kind of small, but this guy, as you can see, I mean, he's got some size. Yeah. But it was kind of neat. People do what they can for Christmas.
Yeah.
But we had Drew Carey. I got his autograph. That's me there. Yeah. It was kind of neat too. I'm not a baseball fan, but Roger Clemens was there. This was a month or 2 months, whatever it was, before that war started. But he was signing, autograph, and I got one of his autographed, Roger Clemens CY6 for Cy Young 6. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, so USO was coming up to a certain extent, but it was weird because Drew Carey, he's known by his glasses, and
Yeah.
he had LASIK or something like that. Didn't
So
have
he
his
didn't have it
glasses.
anymore?
It's like it doesn't look like him. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Myers, who just happened to be an Air Force general at the time, but he was there and got to meet him and that kind of thing. Yeah, let's sandstorms here.
What about the Kuwaitis?
Actual Kuwaitis themselves are very rich, and you very seldom see them because they're someplace cool or whatever. They would, if they needed a ditch dug or anything like that, they'd hire a TCN, Third Country National. They're the ones who did all anything that required labor, and they were coming from India or someplace like that. And fallacious living conditions and tough work and stuff like that. But Kuwait is a very rich country, so if you're actual Kuwaiti, life is pretty good. Except for 1990, of course, when Saddam came in and rape, pillage, the country. And actually, Ali al-Salim was a Kuwaiti Air Force base, and there were his troops, Saddam's troops, had lined up a lot of Kuwaitis and shot him. They still had all the bullet holes and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting. Like I said, one of the times just out going between, you got your Camels, or you got a '74 Chevy pickup, and he's got a camel in the back. So it's kind of an odd, not something you expect to see.
No. Expect to see a shotgun, huh?
Yeah, well, something. But we had a lot of M1s moving north and stuff like that. So I'd be passing these convoys of just all these different vehicles, a lot of tanks and stuff like that. But let's see. Let's see if I can find, a lot of different aircraft out of there. A lot of Army, or some Army, British Tornadoes. There's a sad story associated with that. During the war had started, so it was probably, end of March, April timeframe. And we had Patriot missile batteries there, and the Patriots come a long way because he was shooting stuff at, and they'd shoot the Patriot, and it would hit, and then stuff would fall everywhere. But a couple tornadoes were coming back from a mission, and they would squawk friend or foe, and they would come into our operations center. And the second aircraft was further behind the first than usual, and didn't know what was going on. Okay, we think he's squawking friend. No, he's not. Yes, he is. No, he's not. Finally, yes, he is. And the Patriots, the system could lock on, and if it wasn't squawking friend, it would fire. But eventually it started squawking friend, and so the Patriot isn't going to fire. But the Patriot missile battery officer overrides it, fires the missile, blows the tornado, kills both pilots.
Why did he or she override?
I can only assume she did that because, we'd already had several, attacks, things launched at us. And she was pretty being, jumpy and didn't trust the technology. And because it was, friend, not sure, friend, foe, not sure. System says it's friend, but I really want to take, because what if it is a missile and it does get through?
Yeah.
Which, So anyway, yeah, she went manual and launched it and blew it right out of the sky. So that was extremely unfortunate. But we had a lot of Marines there. Here's one of the Patriot missile launchers.
Okay.
We actually had a couple individuals getting re-enlisted there. Here's a picture of the Predator, one of them.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So they had several of them there. That was quite interesting. I think there's a better picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should explain what a Predator is.
Well, Predator drone, especially back then, it was basically it was initially used for reconnaissance and that kind of thing. Started being used more for, but they didn't carry any weapons. But a few, flown by other government entities had some weapons, and of course, they pretty much all have weapons on them now, hellfire missiles. So if they do see the target, they can also engage and destroy the target, as opposed to reconnaissance, because they're really designed to kind of loiter like at 10,000 feet, amazing optics, zoom right in, see exactly who's doing what, that kind of thing, and then feed that channel back like to a command and control center. So a decision can be made. Yes, we want to take that out. No, we don't. All right, we need to wait for this to happen. But that predator's up there providing that real-time visual, so you can make a more informed, a better decision. So we had several of them there, and they were constantly in the air
How long were you
flying.
over there?
November of 2002 through June of 2003.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's just get to a good old sandstorm here. Well,
Is that a sandstorm?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so, we got bunkers up around the radar and that kind of thing, but you kind of get an idea on just how, so.
Is that color?
Yeah, that color, yeah. That or darker, kind of nasty.
Does it hurt?
That's kind of like sandblasting, depends on, that kind of thing. But I want to show kind of a cool picture of okay. So here they're just kind of monkeying around how crazy it gets. But right here is the operations center. You can't see the big screens and stuff like that, and for various reasons. But I just want a picture of the people, and just, absolutely crazy the amount of information that comes in to be made for, decisions. Pretty interesting. This is ongoing.
No, I was going to say, what's that?
Well, this was after an attack, and I was trying to cool down. But this is during an attack, so this is one of the bunkers.
What kind of attack?
Missile attack.
Okay.
Yeah, the missiles he wasn't supposed to have.
Yeah.
Just here, and we got to the point where you would just sleep in your chem gear and stuff like that. But
Did you become desensitized to the attacks, or?
You can get used to anything. I wouldn't say desensitized, because it was that was dangerous, but we certainly you can just get used to anything. Wearing your chem gear. The one thing that was really interesting, I'll give that to you there, is after we were wearing our chem gear, that includes these kind of rubber overboots, and after, I don't know, 10 days or something like that of constantly wearing these boots because of the attacks and threat of attack and whatever. A couple people came to me and said, shirt is first sergeant is one of those things that goes back to the cavalry days, and first sergeant's just that, or top sometimes they're called, but they're called shirt because when new clothes would come into a post, the top or the first sergeant got to pick the shirt first. So first shirt, anyway.
Okay.
So anyway, a couple of my folks come in, they're shirt. People got to take his boots off because basically it was so hot, and it's completely enclosed. Their feet were rotting off. It was just, you want to talk about a smell. And literally, people's several inches of skin were just, because it was moist. It's constantly moist.
Oh.
Yeah. So one, they weren't necessarily following certain protocols, but for the most part, it was just you had to. You slept in the stuff. It was a 24/7 thing. So we figured out that what, you at certain times you can take your boots off, but you got to carry them with you and stuff like that, because we didn't want a bunch of people basically not being able to perform the mission.
Right.
Because they had some major issues with their feet.
Right.
But absolutely, it was pretty disgusting. Just really just rotten off, skin rotten off, and pretty amazing smell.
Did you see a lot of other injuries, or?
Well, we had a morgue there. It was a reefer truck. But use what you got. So we had, unfortunately, I didn't see. They were coming through.
Yeah.
The closest, we had some minor things occur, but mainly just accidents around. Just a lot's going on, and people are getting hurt. They're busting up their ankles and different things like that. The fatality, we had. My unit was the 729th Air Control Squadron, right out of Hill Air Force Base. The Air Force had a couple more. One 728th Air Control Squadron out of Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and then the 606th Air Control Squadron out of Spangdahlem, Germany. The 728th, on a boat for 30 days, again has all the equipment just like we've got.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming over. They're at Doha, offload. This is April. So we have already done, some of my folks have gone up into Iraq doing site surveys because we know where this is going. But why do you need an air control squadron at, well, when we first saw it, Saddam Hussein International Airport. Of course, that was changed quickly. Well, why do you do that? Because you need radar that can look at the Iranians and the Syrians. So 729th comes in, offload. They end up at Al Salim, where most of us are still at. And they're getting everything ready, ops checking older, and then they're moving north. And it was probably in May. Well, actually, I know exactly when it was. It was May 13th. So they're, day 1, day 2 of their convoy or whatever. And they were broken up into different convoys and stuff like that. And I had some of my guys with them as well with their unit, and they were going to end up at Baghdad International Airport and set up this command and control. So, but RPG, we're really not sure what happened. RPG's as close as we could come, but and of course, no one called them insurgents or anything. They were just still fighting the war at that time. So anyway, RPG or something, but it goes through. He was passenger, goes through the passenger door, and of course, wearing body armor, but doesn't do any good. Doesn't detonate, so it doesn't kill. Doesn't explode the truck, doesn't kill the driver, but most certainly killed him. 25-year-old staff sergeant. Had a wife, a couple young kids. So, and we had seen him literally just that 2 days before that.
Is that
but,
what the dog tags are from?
No, actually, that particular individual, Staff Sergeant Patrick Griffin, was the one from the 728th, and of course, then he comes back through us, in a coffin, and is escorted by another unit member back to Florida to his wife and family. No, the red dog tag.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a good friend of mine, David Betty, Vietnam vet, Marine, excellent man. He passed away a little over a year ago from a lot of different ailments, many associated with Agent Orange, and my office does a lot of work, and I'll touch on that at the end, but a lot of work with veterans. That's why the Veteran Service Office is here. But he was a good man, good friend. Passed away. He was out walking his dog, and it's kind of one of the way I would like to go. You're out and about, and then you're not. None of this lingering kind of thing. But yeah, Dave was a good guy. His wife gave me one of the dog tags. So yeah, he's a good guy.
Back to Kuwait.
So back to Kuwait, and my particular unit was very fortunate. Like I said, the 728th had a fatality. The 606th, they had some kind of, they're always lobbing mortars. They either run around or they scream up in their tactical, their little Toyota, and lobbing in mortars and stuff like that. But one of our guys takes some shrapnel to a leg, and one of their airmen, takes his foot off and that kind of thing. So we were pretty fortunate, even those of us that were driving around, because even before the war started, when I'd go between Salim and Doha, they were attacking Doha every once in a while, not with bombs. They would literally just try to run the gate and shoot up the guards and stuff like that. You never knew what you're going to get when you're out driving around. It was kind of surreal, because I could be picking up someone at Kuwait Airport, and one individual would stay at the truck. We'd wear civilian clothes, wear a vest, go in the airport, you take the vest off. Don't go in armed, obviously. But you're waiting for the courier. Meanwhile, you know what? Hey, there's Starbucks, Cinnabons. So you go over and get your Starbucks. Courier comes in. All right, let's go. Go back out, vest on, get in the truck, head back out into the desert, drinking your Starbucks. Surrounded by your 9mm and your M16, and it was kind of a weird
juxtaposition.
Yeah, and you don't who's watching and what's going on, stuff like that. But you just pay attention. We always left the vehicles dirty. because you've come out and you'd see fingerprints. All right, who's touching my vehicle? Why are they touching it? What are they placing up underneath? Things like that. And you go through defensive driving, which it's not defensive at all. It's actually offensive driving. I mean, it's you get different scenarios, and it's basically hey, you need to stay safe. So what does that mean? And that type of thing. So yeah, it was always interesting out on the roads for sure. But war goes on. Eventually, most assets are now up at Baghdad. We eventually rotate out, but before back to Hill. And then of course, coming back was not exactly you might see some big welcomes and stuff like that. But we took a C-17 from Al Salim to Hill Air Force Base. And we pop the hatch, flags flying, everything else. We get down, commander says, first sergeant, take the flag out. So, walking across the tarmac with the flag and, the troops and the families, they're restrained. Pretty soon a couple kids come running out and stuff like that, and it's pretty cool. But, obviously, I had got the Dear John letter. My wife at the time, she was there to meet me, and, I remember we went to, she said, well, any place special you want to go, and so we went through Taco Bell and then home.
A personal favorite.
Yeah, well, just something different.
Yeah.
Because over there got, the chow hall did a good job feeding us, but, hey, send salsa and Tabasco. So it was kind of, because just make it a little bit different. So anyway, yeah, Taco Bell on the way home. But had 3 stepkids, but none of the kids were there. They were gone, stuff like that. So yeah, it was kind of weird. Came back very quiet. Went back in the following day, made sure everything was taken care of with those of us that had come back, because then you were given 2 weeks leave and stuff like that. So after things were kind of settled down, I took my 2 weeks, went to Montana to see my family and that kind of thing. Came back, and of course, just doing stuff at the mission, because we're getting ready. The election year's coming up, and we're now the only air control squadron because 2 are still in Iraq and we're back in the States. So when Dick Cheney was, being from Wyoming, was going back to Jackson, so we deployed, 7,500 folks or thereabouts, literally to this turnout in Jackson. Now, Jackson was beautiful. It's beautiful in the winter. Not when you're on a turnout in December. I mean, the ground was so hard we couldn't drive our grounding rods. We literally went from 118 in the desert and, being shot at, things shot at us, to, that November, December, January, and the whole election run up to it, 25 below zero. It was strange. But anyway, we're doing that mission, but then got divorced, and
what year was this?
That was 2003.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was official in 2004. We get the orders, hey, you're going back to Baghdad. Okay. So I was like, oh, all right. Well, that's what we're here for. So, but they're like, no, we want you to go to the, well, actually, before I get into that, I think there's, a commendation medal from the Iraqi freedom, or from the war, if you will. Let's see here. Just imagine you just take a picture of it. But the unit we were with, Operation Iraqi Freedom, key advisor to the squadron commander for discipline and morale support issues, allowing squadron personnel to focus on their primary mission of controlling over 25,000 sorties, combat sorties, 43,000 air refuelings, so that, tanker up there, and 35 response options. That's before the war started, when we were watching, he wasn't doing stuff, and we had to respond to that. And then obviously when the war started, he managed numerous readiness programs, including contamination control area training, post-attack procedures, rebuilding of bunkers, demonstration of chemical protective equipment, dispersal of auto-injectors, increasing the squadron's ability to survive and operate during 16 Iraqi missile attacks. I'll give that to you.
Okay.
Flash it before the camera there.
There you go.
But, yeah. Baghdad or to Iraq, and
You
the
ended up not
senior,
going?
the senior enlisted individual for the wing goes, "Why don't you go senior NCO academy?" That doesn't make any sense. My unit's going to Iraq. Understood. So that's where I want to go. Understood. Commander's like, hey, he's got to go with us. Well, not quite. So anyway, they deploy to Iraq. So then I'm back handling more of the family issues. Had a call one late at night. Hey, Shirt. I'm trying to reach my wife. Can't reach her. She's been drinking. She never drinks. I got a shotgun in the house. Can you go to the house? Make sure she's okay. Okay. So go to the house, knock on the door, sit down, talk to her. Secure the weapon, that kind of thing. Get her in contact with some of the wife support groups, stuff like that. So you're dealing with more of those types of things when you're back in garrison as opposed to being deployed.
What kind of training did you have to handle those kinds of issues?
Well, one thing, when you go through the First Sergeant Academy, that's where it all starts. Dealing with those personality, just obviously health, morale, and safety, but not just of your unit members, but also families and things like that. But then later on, you're going through different legal training because you're doing a lot of Uniform Code of Military Justice, discipline, discharges, things like that. Also, a lot around suicide prevention, that type of thing. I was actually myself and one other first sergeant and two of the chaplains in one of the base psych docs developed a suicide prevention program because unfortunately we'd had we'd had a couple suicides. There was three on the base. Well, at Hill there was 3 fighter squadrons at Hill, and a couple of the squadrons that had suicides. And then
is it related to post-traumatic stress syndrome, or more to problems, issues that arrive with divorce, with their families?
Well, ultimately it's kind of hard to say. It's probably a combination of a lot of different things. In one particular case, the individual though had never deployed. You hear a lot about like 22 per day.
Yeah.
Veteran suicides, and you look at the numbers, and most of those are, a majority of those, 55% are, have never deployed. So is it because they had to stay behind when units, members were deployed, and maybe some of them came back less than whole, if at all? So you got some guilt around it. It's a kind of a complex, dynamic that's going on. But we were developing this program after the 2, and then unfortunately within the same squadron, fighter squadron, they had 2 within a month. So we're like, well, we'll just roll out with what we got. Don't let great get in the way of good. So we rolled out with it, and we didn't have any suicides after that. But it was a lot of work to put it together, because obviously you got a spiritual component of it, mental health component of it, all the different support structures, risk factors, protective factors. Don't be afraid to intervene. Someone has to, if they're pissed at you for calling myself or chaplain or whatever, that's fine, because you got to be alive to be pissed. Okay, so that's kind of how we. But and it started literally where it was 6 hours, which was too long. And we got it to where it was about 2 hours, and it was, I think, very effective and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things I'm definitely more proud of at Hill.
Has it been rolled out in any way? Or?
It was, but after I had gone through the Senior NCO Academy, this is just a picture of me at the Senior NCO Academy.
Point you out.
Right there.
As you grow and mature in your responsibilities and age.
So the Senior NCO Academy, all the different services have them. We had one Army, we had several Navy, chiefs, senior chiefs. So you can go to the other services, Senior NCO Academies. We also had, not in my particular flight right there, but in the class overall, we had German, Canadian, so it's multinational as well as the other services, and it's everything senior NCOs. So it's just the highest level, and being that senior NCO, more leader, but yes, obviously communication and managing different things, but more on the leadership focus, that type of thing. So I did that. But I remember.
Did you develop a particular leadership style? Do they do that, or?
Sure.
What is it?
Well, when I don't have it in here, I need to bring it in, but it was a picture of John Wayne, I think from Sands of Iwo Jima, Sergeant Stryker, I think he was. But anyway, on it says, life is tough. It's tougher if you're stupid. And that was over my shoulder. Because when airman or sergeant or whomever so-and-so was standing in front of my desk, and I wanted to make sure they saw that. One, this is your opportunity. You may have made, I always hated, and still to this day, when people say, it was a mistake. Really? You're in here for DUI. You had no idea you could not drive and drink at the same time. That's a mistake. You knew fully good and well what the law was, as well as Air Force regulation. So my style was basically there's about a foot difference between a pat on the back and a kick in the ass. So that was kind of how I operated. I'd much rather give you a pat on the back, and if you deserved it, you were going to get it. But if you needed that kick in the ass, you were going to get that too. Regardless of who you were, how long you've been with a particular unit, if you messed up, it may be tough, but it would have to be done. So that was kind of fair. I tried to be as fair as I possibly could. I guess that was kind of my leadership style. Lead by example, but be fair in your dealings with people. So hopefully I achieved that. But I remember one day, if we weren't actually deployed someplace, we were convoying out to the Utah Testing Training Range, out to the Dugway Proving Grounds, or in that general area, and we'd set up and conduct our operations. Control aircraft, huge, that's desert, so that's why you drop bombs on it. You also had, I won't say Rockwell, but not sure the company, but they would, under the START treaty with the Soviets, we were dismantling our different missiles, and we, best way to do that is to blow up the engine, and they come in and verify it and everything else. So part of the Utah Testing Training Range was used to blow up these ICBM missile or rocket motors, and then the Russians would verify it, and okay, cool, which of course we still have plenty in the ground even today. But out there we would play our war games, and aircraft, at certain times would also drop live ordnance and things like that. Several F-16s, would auger in. Unfortunately, sometimes the pilots would survive, sometimes they'd punch out. But when you're practicing, it's dangerous, and sometimes things would happen. And there's several aircraft, buried in the salt mud out there in the Utah Testing Training Range. But anyway, we'd go out there. We'd be out there for a week or so, dig our defensive fighting position, set up, do our operations. That's where we actually had some of our worst injuries. Because say it was
back in the States.
Yeah, back in the States during exercises when we're practicing, if you will. It was snowing. Didn't have to worry about that in the desert. It could get very cold and rained in the desert, but it was. I remember one time it was snowing, and this one of you was going down into a defensive fighting position, which we even do that different now. You don't dig a hole; you build it up with sandbags. But anyway, he was going down. He slipped and he almost bit his tongue off.
Oh.
And so that was kind of nasty because we're about 4 hours from middle of nowhere into the base in Salt Lake City. So that was obviously a quick trip in. We had another guy. Dislocated his shoulder. So yeah, we had more serious injuries just in whenever we were building up to deploy than we actually did deploy. I think a lot of this, when you're deployed, your focus is maybe a little bit more, but sometimes the weather had a part to play in that. But anyway, come in from one of these exercises and put down all my gear, and whenever someone was PCSing or changing to a different base, those orders would come through me first, and I'd sign off on them. Well, this one's got my name on it. So what is up with this? Yeah. So I was like, Port, and I couldn't even pronounce it. Port Hueneme. California. I do not want to go to California. Navy. Okay. Worked with the Seabees in, Kuwait. Excellent. But really didn't want to go to California. But 2005, I come out here, which was last year we had rain in Southern California. 2005 to 2007, I was the first sergeant for the Air Force detachment out there. Heavy vehicle vehicle equipment maintenance, rather. So they have a joint school. It's one of those A schools, like when I went for fuels to Chinook. If you're going to be a vehicle mechanic in the Air Force, you come to Port Hueneme. Well, the Seabees also have their Seabee school, but their for their different, builder, electrician stuff, but for their vehicle mechanics as well. So it's a joint school with the Navy and the Air Force. I was the first sergeant out there. It was good. However, it's very much a training environment. You're dealing a lot with 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Which are younger than what you were dealing with.
Yes, and obviously,
At Hill.
Yeah, at any other location.
Did you like it?
No.
And why not?
I count, from Korea, where it's high ops tempo, to Hill, where when I was with the air control squadron, with Air Combat Command on either the Component Maintenance Squadron or the Air Control Squadron, especially the Air Component or Air Control Squadron, very high ops tempo. Come to Port Hueneme, sun, palm trees, training, definitely a different tempo. There is no ops tempo. I mean, your wartime mission is training to send out to the operational Air Force. So, yeah, I didn't really care for it because you're dealing with a lot of, knucklehead issues, underage drinking, fraternization between my students and maybe Navy permanent party, those kinds of things. Every once in a great while, one of my instructors, but usually that wasn't an issue. I mean, that you'd be selected to be an instructor, so you usually wasn't. So it was usually some kind of student type of issue. Not just young students, different advanced levels of school as well. Very seldom issues with them, but usually those 18, 19, 20-year-olds, just like most any other place, had some issues. So, just dealing with that, it was not what I really enjoyed. Would you say
you kind of more thrive on the exhilaration of combat, or
certainly that operational, combat-related environment, sure, or mission, absolutely. I think most people do in the service, but it was still a necessary function. We approached it as, you will not leave here if you are not squared away, because I'm not going to send you out to the Operational Air Force, send you out to a unit that I may know someone in, if you can't do some of the very basic stuff that we ask you to do, whether either as an airman or in your being a vehicle mechanic. Certainly if you can't do that job, you're out of here. But if you can't follow some basic rules, you're not going to be out of here, or you will be out of here as well. Not going to send you to one of my friends knowing that they're going to have to deal with you, maybe at a location where they really don't have time to deal with you. So most, you're still that age, but you're learning, but you're not, looking to cause any kind of trouble. Sometimes trouble finds you, and we would take corrective action. If we couldn't take, or if we took X amount of corrective action, then yes, maybe that would mean that they're going to be separated. But very few actually, went out of their way to find trouble. There were a couple, but you separate them as well. So when you do graduate and you go onto the Operational Air Force, you're ready to go. We're giving them someone that they can use, someone that I would want in my unit if I was receiving them. So
how long were you there? Which is
just
not
2 years.
that far from where we're sitting now.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It was about 2 years, 2005. March of 2005, and then I retired in May of 2007. I was thinking about
Why
maybe.
did you leave?
Well, I was the first sergeant, so EA, 20 years in, making chief, because you test for chief. A lot of factors go into that, but that wasn't going to be an issue. But then it was going to be, I owe them for sure another 3 years.
And the relationship, though.
I ended up, we were very serious. We ended up getting married in 2008. But she had no experience with the military. Already been through that one time before, and that didn't end well. Because once you're actually in it, that's a completely different story. So you figure there was probably going to be another 2, 3, 4, 5 PCSs, other deployments, because this is 2007. Iraq is still hot and heavy, let alone Afghanistan. It was just kind of the right decision to go ahead and.
Were you sad when you left?
Oh, I missed certain. Oh, absolutely miss certain things of it.
What do you miss?
Again, that operational, that high ops tempo, working with folks, getting down and dirty and getting things done. But it was a good.
What'd you do when you left?
Well, before we get quite to that, let's see. this here, this was actually when I left Hill Air Force Base, but it's a meritorious service medal.
Before Port Hueneme.
Before Port Hueneme, yeah. And it's just kind of talking about some of the things I did as the fuels management flight, superintendent. Basically our response time to aircraft and things like that. But at one point, we lost a lot of our pipeline capability to receive fuel via pipeline. So we had a massive increase in trucks without massive increase in people. So we had a lot of coordination and things like that, but basically got it done, and it ended up in the 75th Air Base
problem,
Wings.
to say the least.
Well, security, but just if your workload increases 75%, and yet you still you don't get a corresponding increase in staffing in your manpower, that's going to create an issue. But we figured it out, and basically everyone just worked really hard to get it done. But how you schedule it, whether the truck's coming in, a lot of staggering and things like that. But when we ended up doing really well, we got an excellent rating on a Headquarters Air Force Materiel Command and Air Combat Command Operational Readiness Inspection. So it went really well. Like I said, Hill was a very good base. On the air combat side, more so than on the fuels, but fuels was good as well. So I don't know if you want to
Flip that by?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's check it out.
And then, well, it's when I did decide to retire and my retirement ceremony. So this is just some things on my retirement ceremony, and then this actually just talks about it's another meritorious service medal. Talking about when I was stationed, as the first sergeant for the 345th Training Squadron at Port Hueneme, California. During this period, Sergeant McManus' skills were instrumental in the development of over 3,500 students in the coordination of multiple Air Force and Navy agencies to improve critical medical, dental, legal, assault, sexual assault, professional development, promotion, testing, military equal opportunity for staff and students, because being a small Air Force det on a big Navy base, you can easily get overlooked. I didn't think we should be overlooked, so worked with a lot of folks to make good things happen. Let's see here. Additionally, he directed Base Sexual Assault Awareness Month events, highlighted key information to 6,000 joint personnel. Let's see. But basically, all things culminating in the unit receiving an excellent rating in the 2007 Headquarters Air Education and Training Command Operational Readiness Inspection. So that was at the time that I retired, and now there's some retirement pictures. But this is just a copy of, it was an invitation that went out. The unit was known as Rolling Thunder, the Air Force detachment on Navy Base Ventura County. So that's just a copy of the invite that went out. On the back of that is a picture that I certainly treasure. George and Laura. Yeah.
Where did you get that?
Well, as Commander-in-Chief, the Commander-in-Chief, regardless of who it is, sends basically a letter of congratulations and thanks for supporting the nation and that kind of thing. So they don't always include the picture, but I was fortunate enough to get one and certainly appreciated that. And this is just from Congresswoman Capps. So this one here with Lois Capps, but I like this one because I'm a senior master sergeant, but I'm still wearing the diamond, so that's first sergeant, and she knew enough to put first sergeant in there, so I thought that was pretty cool. And the governor of California just sent a letter of congratulations, which I don't know how I'd feel if it was Jerry, but that's a whole different issue.
When was this?
Well, this was 2007.
Okay.
So, but I thought it was unique because Arnold, of course, was governor at the time.
Yeah.
So just I extend my most sincere congratulations as you retire following 20 years of dedicated service in the Air Force. The security of America and safety of its citizens depend on your willingness of brave people to answer our nation's call And he just kind of goes on to talk about Californians and freedom-loving people and his gratitude and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I grew up watching, Predator and
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, and
Yeah.
sure enough, so
For anybody who sees this tape in the future, he was an actor. The last name is Schwarzenegger.
And then this is actually signed by the Commander-in-Chief. So this is George W. But basically, just certificate of appreciation, and he's extending his personal thanks and sincere appreciation on behalf of a grateful nation. So on a job well done. So that's certainly.
Oh, you got a lot.
Yeah. Well, and then this one, anyone is working towards this, and this is just the retirement certificate signed by the Chief of Staff. So this is my actual retirement certificate. After a little over, it's like 20 years and 2 weeks. So let me give that one to you there.
Boy, that's heavy.
Yeah. But I there's a couple pictures of the actual, my family and whatnot. One brother and his family weren't able to come, unfortunately, but my father and mother
really?
and, one brother and at the time he just had the son came out and that kind of thing. But of course, my dad, I presented him with the flag, the honor guard folds the flag and that kind of thing, and I presented it to him. My mom, she was finally relieved after 20-some years, and I presented her with some
Roses, did you say?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And my beautiful bride there.
Oh,
And, yeah.
she is pretty.
And then presenting the flag to my dad. This individual over here, he was skipper, but he was in charge of the Navy Construction Training Center, the joint with the Seabees. So it was definitely nice to have him at my retirement ceremony. And just some pictures of the crowd and one thing, the honor guard.
It looks touching.
Yeah, it was. It was very, very nice after 20 years, which you're thinking, wow, they just went by in the blink of an eye, very, very quickly.
Felt like that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it was a good 20 years. It was over in the blink of an eye. Worked with a lot of good people, and I think we did some good things. When I left the Air Force, it was always, okay, now what type of a thing. I wanted to make sure to, be with another organization that was doing good things for people. So I was fortunate enough to work with Baxter International Healthcare. And in their Thousand Oaks plant making hemophilia drugs. And I was their training development manager. Completely amazing process. It's a biological process, and it's just phenomenal. But
That's kind of a departure from your previous.
yeah, I mean, it was just. But again, it's very. I mean, if you think about, in the military, the standard operating procedures, checklists, things like that. When you're in a highly regulated industry, basically they're big pharma, biotech. Standard operating procedures, lots of regulation, lots of inspections, all those different inspections I was telling about. Instead of the Air Force, whatever command coming in, FDA's coming in, or some international group is coming in to audit and inspect and things like that. So you're working long hours, you're doing good things that save people's lives. So there was definitely some similarities there, and I like that. So it was a good company. Worked for them for a couple years, 2007 through 2009. But my wife was looking for a job. She's a teacher in education, language primarily. But she was looking for a change. And the county of Ventura had a position open as the county veteran service officer. So she showed it to me. I was like, sounds pretty interesting. I mean, it gets back with active duty military and veterans. So I applied and was fortunate enough to go through the whole process and be selected as the County of Ventura's Veteran Service Officer. There's 56 of us in California, so almost one in every state, and 29 states have a similar type of setup as we do in California. But basically what we do is I manage the office, got to be a vet myself. My accredited people, the ones who file claims with the VA, they're all veterans themselves. But we connect fellow veterans with their federal VA benefits, if they were injured in the service, health care, education, burial, you name it. But also their state VA benefits as well. Maybe property tax exemption, there's some education benefits, a lot of other different kinds of benefits. but because we're local, we know what's going on locally. So also the chairman for the Ventura County Military Collaborative. So if there's something local that can assist our vets, we can tie them in that way as well. So that's worked out very well. Been doing that now since January of 2010 until today, and I think we do some really good work for our fellow vets, especially those, well, not just those transitioning, our newer vets, but our Vietnam vets, World War II, Korea as well. But we see primarily Vietnam era vets.
Oh, really?
That's the largest. Well, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of our World War II vets.
Yeah.
And we're set draft and just millions and millions of people in, but we've lost most of them. Same with Korea. So Vietnam is that last big draft population, if you will.
Boomers.
So that's who we see a lot of, but we've slowly, over the last couple of years now, probably about 17-18% of the vets that are in Ventura County are Iraq or Afghan vets. Now that could be old guys like me who were literally around in '87 all the way up through 2007, to those, that Marine who was in for 4 years who saw 2-3 deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan. So it's a age range in there, but we're seeing more and more of them.
What do you think the biggest issues are to our vet?
Awareness of their benefits. I mean, the Department of Defense and the VA and have done a lot of work to try to educate before they get out to file that disability compensation claim for all those injuries you had in service before you even get out. But when you're getting ready to leave the service, you got a lot going on, and that probably is not on your list. So certainly employment. Most of them know about the GI Bill, which is a great benefit, or their home loan. Okay. But really it's just educating them, and then if they are educated, getting them connected to VA healthcare, to those for those injuries that they had in service and things like that. That might make their life a little bit easier if they're getting treatment for it, but also some kind of compensation for it. So just that whole awareness thing and getting them connected is a big piece of it, and that's for our new folks coming out. Lots been done since 2013 on. Well, what about everybody before? So again, we just spend a lot of time and working with a lot of people to spread that word, and a lot of presentations and a lot of different meetings, and to reach those other groups of veterans. So awareness is certainly a big issue. Employment has been at times, especially 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, where, for the 18 to 24 year group, it was double digits. It was just insane. It's improved actually quite a bit. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of employers who want to hire vets because they bring so much to the table, especially around that soft skill set. Pressure, yeah, they can handle the pressure, they can deal with people, they can communicate, in addition to whatever, maybe if you're hiring them for a particular skills, functional skill set. So a lot of people want to hire vets.
How did you find the transition, personally?
Well, I should have taken more time off before when I retired, because I was probably burnt out after 7 years of being a first sergeant, because it's a 24/7, and you're dealing with, you want to deal with 98% of your unit on the promotions and all the good stuff, but you really spend most of your time with the 2% on, father molested his child, someone got a DUI, we're separating this individual, that type of thing. So I was a little tired, so it was kind of nice to, leave that. But 2 weeks, then I'm in another high pressure environment, with Baxter. And so a little more time definitely would have been. But Baxter's a great company, very good to its employees, but you will most certainly work, but hey, that's why you get paid, right?
How are most vets making that transition?
Well, some make it well, some it's not well at all. And it really depends on what kind of support structure they have leaving the service. If you're a female veteran, and you've got deployments, and maybe you've got your own physical and psychological issues that we're going to have to, treatment and compensation for, but you're also taking care of the kids. But, a year before you get out, you get a divorce, and you're in Port Hueneme, California, but you're from wherever, Maine. So, but you get out here, you've got maybe post-traumatic stress and some physical conditions. You're watching the 2 kids. You're divorced. He's a bum not paying child support. That type of thing. And you're having a hard time finding a job in a very high cost of living area. So there it could be very difficult. But if, and say you got, we get calls from, parents. Hey, my son's 24-year Marine, 24-year-old Marine, couple tours to Iraq. There's definitely some things going on, but he won't ever talk about it. He just sits downstairs, plays video games, and drinks. Okay. So yes, it is definitely tough depending upon, there's some support structure, but until they've dealt with what happened in service, it can be very difficult, which is why we have things like the Ventura County Military Collaborative and a legal clinic, so vets can talk to an attorney for free on any number of issues from family law to landlord-tenant and all kind, expungements and things like that, to Veterans Treatment Court, where we get treatment for vets that they have to have some kind of tie between their service and then, so say you've got a vet who's got that, has post-traumatic stress and getting 2 hours of sleep at night, pretty wrung out, sleep deprivation, got some anger issues, probably some depression as well, intrusive thoughts, drinks too much one night, trying to numb himself as well as pass out, but wakes up a couple hours later, restless, maybe has a fight with the wife, leaves, gets in his car, drives, DUI. Do we really think jail is the best place for that, Marine Corps combat vet? Or should we get them treatment? Usually it's through the VA, usually inpatient, but it can be outpatient depending upon the severity of everything. Do we need a court system that, stays the fines and fees, allows them to get the treatment, and it can be 9, 12, 15 months. Maybe get them connected with their disability compensation, get them enrolled in VA health care, allow them to deal with the anger, the depression, that post-traumatic stress. And if they do, and they're on probation. So if you violate probation, bad things can happen. But if you graduate and you have your fines and fees waived, the judge expunges a guilty plea, seals the record, so no employer, unless you're going for Homeland Security or something, but no employer is going to be able to know that you had a DUI or a domestic issue or whatever.
Yeah.
But most importantly, you've got the treatment for it, which there's no cure, but you're much able to cope, or you at least now have a better idea on what those skill set is to allow you to cope. That's why we have things like, Veterans Treatment Court, to help some of those vets who have a harder time transitioning in that. Because, for some vets, it is extremely difficult. And it's so varied. Could you figure roughly, 25% of our vets come back with post-traumatic stress?
So I was going to ask you what the percentage was.
Yeah, 20 to 25% post-traumatic stress. Could also be traumatic brain injury. We have injuries now that service members survive, but in probably even the first Gulf War, certainly in Vietnam, they would have died. Blast injuries, now with body armor, with medevacs, where you've got that medic and that crew is, boom, they land, they pick you up, they've got you at some kind of combat hospital. Next thing you know, you're at a regional medical center like Landstuhl, Germany, near Ramstein, and then you're back in the States after being stabilized there. You may have lost your leg or two. You may have some fairly serious traumatic brain injury, but you live. So more vets are coming back pretty seriously broke, physically, spiritually, whereas 15, 20 years ago, that injury would have killed them.
What about the tent cities and the homeless vets and all that?
Well, it varies from city to city. You look at LA, has more homeless vets than any other city in the nation. And the VA wasn't exactly doing what they should have been doing to support that. And it's not just the VA. It takes cities, county to a certain extent, nonprofits, faith-based. It takes everybody. But they're doing a lot of things on the campus of the Greater LA Med Center for permanent housing, which was always originally, it was deeded to them for that purpose, and now it's kind of going back to that purpose. So that's certainly a good start. But yeah, we have, they do point-in-time counts. In Ventura County, we've got something like 57. So it's a matter of finding the place to put them. Services, social workers, that's not the issue. It's where's the permanent housing. Forbes or some magazine puts out, hey, Ventura County, you are the top 10 in the nation in places to live in, medium-sized populations. Well, that's great. I'm sure the Chamber of Commerce absolutely loves it. But certainly drives up housing costs. So if you're a homeless vet and really, if you're not making all that much, it's very difficult. So yeah, there are resources there, both at the federal level and at the county level that we try to plug them in with. There's some, nonprofits as well that we work with to try to address, the homeless issue and that kind of thing. But it's a challenge, primarily because of the lack of very affordable housing.
What do you think? This is just a larger problem that's causing all this, but do you think there's any resolution to the situation in the Middle East?
They haven't been able to come up with one for what, 3,000 years? Yeah, exactly.
10,000.
Yeah,
And I just wonder,
exactly.
can you envision such a thing?
I guess it depends. In my personal opinion, we pulled out of Iraq in 2011. Shouldn't have happened. At that point in time, we bought it. Forget whatever the reasons were for getting in there, which I think they were justified, but whatever, we were there to pull out knowing the kind of vacuum that was going to be left behind because the Iraqis were not able to support themselves. It was well known and documented what is going to happen, and it's exactly what happened. You got a major power vacuum. People rush in, and in that particular survival of the fittest, well, that usually means the most brutal, is going to survive, and that's exactly what happened with ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call them.
I think this is a good place to wrap it.
You want to wrap it?
That's right.
All right.
Okay, well, on behalf of our organization, the DAR, and this country in general, I would like to thank you very much for your service and your continued support of this country's veterans.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.